If you're hearing this, it means the world outside has gone quiet. The traffic has thinned, the last porch lights have flickered out, and the night has finally settled into its own long breath. Welcome to Little Dream, where we tell the kinds of stories made for the hours between midnight and morning. The hours when your mind drifts, your heartbeat seems too loud, and even the smallest sound from the corner of the room feels like it's listening back. Tonight, I want you to sit with me. Not too close, not too far. Just near enough that my voice can follow you into the dark, but not quite near enough to drown it out. We're not here for monsters with sharp teeth or ghosts in white gowns. No. We're here for the other kind of fear. The quiet one. The one that taps at your shoulder when you're alone. The one that whispers when you try to fall asleep. Tonight, I'll tell you 5 stories. Stories about places that don't behave the way they should. Stories about people who stepped too close to the edge of the ordinary and slipped into something older, quieter, and far more patient. So take a breath. Make sure your doors are locked. Check that the hallway light is still on, even if you're not quite sure you turned it on yourself. Because the night is long, and some things only happen once the rest of the world has finally gone to sleep. Settle in. Stay awake with me, just for a little while. This is Little Dream. I remember the first time I saw the salt flat. Not the famous ones people take wedding photos on or drag racing videos of cars touching impossible speeds, but a quieter, lonelier part of Nevada where the air felt thin enough to cut your lips and the sunlight seemed to bleach the horizon into something featureless. Back then, the company that hired us told us it was a simple depth sensor installation, just a few days of work, good pay, and an easy chance to disconnect from the usual grind of government jobs and private contracts. We'd all done projects like this before, though never in a place where satellite coverage mysteriously failed and GPS maps showed the region as a blank rectangle, as if the landscape had been erased on purpose. We drove out in 2 trucks, kicking up little storms of white dust behind us as the terrain flattened into a sheet of pale mineral crust. Even from a distance, the ground looked brittle, like porcelain that had been cracked and reheated too many times. I remember touching the surface with the tip of my boot and feeling the subtle give beneath it, not enough to sink into, but enough to feel hollow, like there was a space just below the surface waiting patiently, listening. The air hummed faintly, though none of us mentioned it at the time. We thought it was the trucks cooling down or the headache from the heat. Our supervisor, Rourke, handed out the equipment with his usual brusque efficiency, though he looked more tense than usual. His eyes kept drifting toward the low dips and dunes in the distance, as if expecting them to move. He wasn't the kind of man who spooked easily. A former military engineer, built like a refrigerator wrapped in flannel, yet something in this place seemed to make him quieter, less inclined to crack jokes or nag us about getting the job done quickly. The rest of the crew, Harlan and Diaz, a married couple who worked the heavy drilling gear, and Meyer, our data technician, kept to their tasks, though I noticed how all of us kept glancing at the horizon, as though we were waiting for someone else to arrive. It was the heat, I told myself. Heat makes people quiet. Heat makes people imagine things. But the silence here was different. It wasn't just the lack of wind or wildlife or traffic, it was the absence of anything familiar. Even when we spoke, our voices felt swallowed before they could travel, as if the air didn't want to carry them. It created a strange sensation, a kind of muffled intimacy, like standing in the center of a vast, empty auditorium where the world had forgotten how to echo. We set up base near a cluster of thin metal stakes that had been driven into the ground, markers from some previous survey team. They were old, rusted, half sunk into the crust. Nobody had told us who put them there or when. Our company wasn't known for transparency. When I brushed my hand against one, the metal vibrated faintly, almost imperceptibly, as though resonating with something beneath us. Meyer joked that maybe a subway line ran beneath the salt flat. Nobody laughed. Our first task was to unpack the sensors, heavy, thin cylinders designed to detect seismic activity. These weren't routine devices, they were far more sensitive, the kind used for deep geological mapping. That should have been a sign that something was unusual, but we were all too focused on the paycheck or the oppressive heat to question it. I remember the way the sunlight made the metal gleam, the way the shadows of the equipment stretched long and thin across the blistered ground, as if trying to escape the place faster than we could set up shop. An uneasiness settled into me early on, though I still can't pinpoint the exact moment it took hold. Perhaps it was when I noticed there were no insects buzzing around our food crates, no distant airplane contrails smudging the sky, no shifting of sand or trails that might indicate animal life. It was as if the salt flat repelled every living thing except us, drawing us in with its blankness, its stillness, its deceptive simplicity. As the afternoon deepened, the air began to vibrate, not loud, not even clear, but a subtle trembling that I first mistook for my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. Occasionally the ground felt like it was exhaling, a faint pulse rising through my boots. When I mentioned it to Rourke, he simply frowned and checked the temperature gauge, muttering something about heat distortion. But the others noticed it too. We caught each other pausing, tilting our heads, focusing on something that wasn't quite sound, wasn't quite sensation, more like the memory of a whisper you'd forgotten the words to. Probably the sensors calibrating, Meyer said, though none of the sensors were even activated yet. Despite the strangeness, we pushed on, assembling the drilling rig, mapping the placement zones, checking our equipment. The work kept our hands busy even while the landscape gnawed at our nerves. Every few minutes I'd catch Harlan wiping her forehead and looking around as though she'd heard someone calling her name. Diaz muttered a steady stream of Spanish under his breath, something between a prayer and a curse. The longer we stayed, the more I felt as though something was watching us from below, not above. Something patient. Something ancient. As the sun dropped lower, the temperature shifted abruptly. A coolness crept across the flat, carrying with it that same faint trembling in the air, the almost whisper. It seemed to rise from the ground itself, a thin thread of sound slipping through the crust. When I crouched down and placed my palm against the salt, I felt a faint vibration, rhythmic but not mechanical. Like a breath. Like a pulse. Like language. I pulled my hand away quickly, wiping it against my pant leg even though it wasn't dirty. Somehow the contact had unsettled me more deeply than I wanted to admit. I caught Rourke watching me from across the equipment cases. His expression told me everything. He felt it too, but he didn't want to acknowledge it. Night arrived strangely on the salt flats. Instead of falling, it seems to seep up from the ground, darkening the world from below before the sky even realizes what's happening. Shadows stretched unnaturally, elongating as though pulled by unseen fingers. We set up portable lights, but their beams felt strangely narrow, swallowed by the vast space around us, as if the darkness was hungrier here. When the temperature finally stabilized, we gathered around the first sensor to check for seismic interference. The device was off, completely powered down, just a cold metal cylinder standing upright like a gravestone. And yet, from somewhere below, a faint pattern emerged, sound without sound, an impression of something murmuring in a cadence that felt almost deliberate. We all heard it. Even now, I remember the way we froze, heads tilted, bodies leaning in the direction of something we couldn't quite place. A whisper without air. A hum without vibration. It lasted only a moment before fading into nothing. Rourke looked at each of us, his jaw tight, his posture stiff. We expected him to shut down the project, maybe call the company, ask for clarification or reassurance, but he only cleared his throat and told us to continue working before night temperatures dropped further. His voice was steady, but his eyes weren't. When we returned to our tents, the sky had finally darkened into a dome of stars so bright and crisp it felt as though we were suspended in space. Usually, the night sky brings comfort, a reminder of the vastness beyond our worries. But not here. Here, the stars looked cold, indifferent, glittering over a landscape that felt hollow and hungry. I lay awake listening to the air, my thoughts echoing too loudly inside my head. And somewhere beneath me, just under the thin, brittle crust of the earth, the faintest suggestion of sound stirred, soft, rhythmic, almost like syllables brushing against one another. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself it was the desert cooling. I told myself anything I could think of to avoid acknowledging the truth rising uncomfortably in my chest. Even then, in that first night, before anything truly went wrong, I could feel it. The ground knew we were there. And it was waiting. The second morning rose in a pale, washed-out gradient that made the horizon look bruised, as if the world had been struck sometime during the night and was still recovering. I woke to the dry crackle of my tent zipper as it twitched in the faint breeze, though I didn't remember there being any wind when I fell asleep. My head throbbed with a dull ache that felt too deep to be from dehydration alone, more like I'd been clenching my jaw all night to keep something from escaping. The others looked the same when we gathered around the equipment crates, hollow-eyed, tight-lipped, as if our dreams had all been uncomfortably similar. Vork was already awake, pacing in slow, heavy arcs near the first sensor placement. He wasn't a man who paced. He preferred stillness, preferred to lean against a truck or fold his arms or stand with his feet planted like a tree stump. Pacing meant something was gnawing at him. He didn't greet us. He barely acknowledged us. His eyes kept drifting toward the ground, scanning it as though expecting to see hairline fractures forming beneath our boots. We ate breakfast quietly. The sound of granola crunching between molars seemed unnaturally loud, cutting through the silence in little brittle snaps. The salt flat remained unervingly still, its white surface almost reflective in the early light. Not reflective like water, reflective like bone. That same subtle vibration from the night before murmured beneath the surface, so faint that I wondered if it truly existed or if my mind had begun manufacturing sensations in the absence of familiar sound. At around 9, we checked the sensors again. They were still offline, still unpowered, yet the data pads picked up residual patterns, tiny frequency spikes that looked almost like a heartbeat with a stutter. Meyer frowned at his screen, tracing the jagged lines with a fingertip. "There's no power source," he muttered, voice low and strained, "so this shouldn't be happening. It almost looks like something's responding to the sensor housing itself, like the metal is acting as a tuning fork." No one knew what to say to that. The ground beneath our feet seemed to pulse at that exact moment, not strongly, just enough that dust trembled loose from the edge of a toolbox. The vibration lasted only a second, but the silence afterward felt deeper, hungrier. We split duties for the day. The drilling rig had to be set up properly, and Vork insisted we maintain the original schedule, even though every instinct in my body told me to pack up and leave. Diaz and Harlan worked on stabilizing the rig while Meyer and I took final measurements around a shallow depression in the surface where the next sensor was to be installed. The depression was odd, perfectly circular, its edges unnaturally smooth, as though something had pressed upward from below and then receded. When I tossed a pebble into the center, it landed without a sound, no click, no scrape, no shift of dust. Just silence. The pebbles seemed to vanish into a pocket of stillness, swallowed by an absence so complete it made my skin crawl. "You hear that?" I asked. "Hear what?" Meyer answered, not looking up from his scanner. "Exactly." The drill started mid-morning, its low growl vibrating through the rig, through the metal plates, through the ground. Or at least, it should have. But the moment the drill bit touched the salt crust, the sound dulled, flattened, thinned into something almost soft. It was so unnatural that I felt my stomach tighten. The rig itself shook, but the air around us didn't carry the noise properly. It was as if the ground beneath was drinking the vibration before it could escape. "Is that normal?" Harlan asked, her brow furrowed as she adjusted the torque settings. "No," Diaz said immediately. "Not even close." They pushed deeper. The bit cracked through the top layer, sending tiny flecks of white dust into the air. The dust didn't behave as expected. Instead of dispersing, it drifted downward, sinking quickly as if pulled by something below. It reminded me of ashes falling into water. A few feet into the drilling, everything stopped. The rig let out a strained whine, then froze mid-motion. Diaz hit the kill switch, but the bit remained locked in place, unmoving, as if something beneath the surface had tightened around it. "Try reverse," Harlan said, though her voice trembled. Diaz tried. The machine strained, metal shuddering, bolts rattling under stress, but the drill didn't budge. It was as though the salt flat itself had clamped down with impossible strength. Diaz swore under his breath. He kicked the stabilizer plate. It's caught on something. Something dense. The ground pulsed again. This time it wasn't faint. It was unmistakable. A low, rolling thrum that traveled up through the rig and spread through the air like the tail end of a deep, resonant note. A note that didn't come from machinery. Something beneath us had moved. We all felt it. Even Rourke, who went rigid as a fence post, fists clenched until his knuckles whitened. He seemed to be listening, really listening, jaw set, chin lifted just slightly, like a man trying to identify a voice in a distant crowd. He walked toward the rig. Shut everything down. We need to back off. Diaz drew up his hands. The drill's stuck, Chief. Cut it loose, Rourke ordered. Do you know how much that bit costs? Harlan snapped, though the suggestion of fear edged her voice. I don't care, Rourke replied flatly. Do it. Harlan stared at him, then at the ground, then at the trembling rig. She understood, even if she didn't want to. The four of us backed away as she disconnected the plate housing and lifted the release lever. The rig gave a reluctant groan as it freed itself, leaving the drill bit embedded deep in the salt. The moment it detached, the vibration beneath the ground lessened, but didn't disappear. Meyer checked his data pad. He squinted, then frowned harder. The frequency readings just spiked, he said. Like something reacted to the drill being removed. Rourke's jaw clenched. Everyone stepped back. Slow and steady. The depression in the salt flat, the perfectly round one, seemed deeper now. I didn't remember it being that deep. Shadows pooled at the bottom where none had been before, as if the ground had sagged, or been pulled downward. None of us moved for nearly a full minute, waiting for the next pulse, the next tremor, the next anomaly to give meaning to the tension twisting our guts. Silence stretched around us again, but now the silence felt occupied, inhabited, like a room where someone is holding their breath, waiting. Then, very softly, the whisper returned. Not in the air. Not from our radios. Not from the wind or the sensors or the machinery. It came from the ground itself, rising faintly, threading between the grains of salt, sliding upward like steam through cracks. It didn't sound like a voice, not exactly, but the pattern was unmistakably structured. A cadence. A rhythm. Too deliberate to be geological. Diaz stepped back. Nope, he muttered. No, this is. The ground vibrated sharply. The perfectly circular depression widened, only an inch, but we all saw it, all gasped, all staggered backward. The edges crumbled inward silently, as if the salt crust lacked any real substance at all, like the top layer was only a fragile lid over something deeper, something hollow. I think, Meyer whispered, we're standing over a cavity. I wish it had been that simple. A cavity would have been merciful. But the whisper rose again, stronger this time, taking on a shape, a tone, like syllables pronounced without air. Every hair on my arms lifted. My heart hammered. My breath turned shallow. Something ancient was speaking beneath our feet. Not speaking to us, teaching something, or reciting something, or remembering something that was never meant for human ears. The depression deepened another inch. And another. And then, as if responding to its own invisible cue, the drill bit embedded in the salt started to rotate, slowly, silently, without any power source attached. Harlan screamed. Diaz grabbed her. Meyer stumbled. Rourke whispered, move. And we did. We moved fast. We didn't run, not yet. Running felt like it would draw attention, like whatever was beneath us might react to sudden motion. We backed away step by careful step, retreating until the depression was a small, dark scar on the landscape behind us. The drill bit continued to turn. Slow, deliberate, like a finger beckoning. Rourke inhaled shakily. "We're stopping the project," he said, voice barely audible. "We pack up, we call it in, and we get off this flat before sundown." But I knew, even then, that the salt flat wasn't finished with us. It had let us arrive. It had let us set up. It had let us listen. And now, it wanted something back. By the time afternoon bled into evening, the color of the salt flat had shifted into a tone I still struggle to describe, a dull, bruised gray that seemed to rise from within the crust rather than fall from the darkening sky. There's something unnerving about a landscape that changes color without any change in the light itself. It felt as if the ground had begun reacting to us, mirroring our fear like some primitive, geological instinct. None of us talked about it, though the tension wound tighter with every minute we spent packing equipment back into the trucks. Rourke didn't explain his decision to withdraw. He didn't have to. Even the simplest tasks, rolling up cables, sealing equipment cases, felt wrong here, as if the ground disapproved of our attempt to leave. Every few minutes, a faint tremor rippled beneath us, not strong enough to threaten our footing but just steady enough to remind us the desert was not still. Something was shifting down there, repositioning itself, listening for us as we moved. At one point, I realized I had unconsciously begun timing those tremors in my head, 5, 6, sometimes 7 minutes apart, though never consistently. The intervals meant something, or maybe I was trying desperately to impose meaning on them so they wouldn't feel as monstrous as they did. But the more I listened, the more I felt the pattern tightening like a knot. Harlan refused to go near the abandoned drill site again, so Meyer and I were the ones set to retrieve the last of the rig components. I remember the air feeling heavy around us, as if the flat were pressing upward toward our chests. When we arrived, the depression in the ground had changed shape. The edges had slumped inward, widening into an imperfect oval with dark veins spidering from its center, thin cracks that pulsed faintly when the tremors rolled through. It reminded me disturbingly of something biological, like the salt was no longer behaving as mineral crust but as some kind of membrane. The drill bit still rotated. Slower now, but undeniably moving. As though responding to something below. "Turn around," Meyer whispered. "We should not be here. We shouldn't have come near it again." "I know," I whispered back. And yet I found myself stepping closer, drawn by fear and curiosity in equal measure. The air above the depression felt cooler. I knelt and lowered my hand, not to touch the ground, God, no, but to test the temperature. A faint current rose from the depression, steady as a slow, subterranean breath. "I keep thinking," Meyer said softly behind me, "that the whispers are getting clearer. Like if I stood here long enough, I'd start understanding them." That terrified me more than anything else. "Don't listen," I told him. But it was too late. He already was. I grabbed the final toolbox, slammed it shut, and motioned for us to retreat. The ground trembled again, this time not beneath our feet but outward, radiating from the depression itself. It was subtle but unmistakably centered there. We hurried back to camp where Diaz and Harlan were tying down the last of the crates. They didn't ask about the drill site, and we didn't volunteer anything. A kind of unspoken pact settled over us: we don't say what we saw. We don't talk about the whispers. We leave. But leaving proved far less simple than packing. When Rourke tried to start the first truck, the engine coughed, sputtered, then died. He tried again, harder. Nothing. The second truck fared no better. The lights dimmed, then flickered out entirely. "Electrical problem," Diaz muttered, but his tone held no conviction. "No," Harlan whispered, "it isn't electrical. Everything was working this morning." Something. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. The tremor at that moment surged through the salt flat like a groan of shifting earth. We all froze. The sound, or what passed for sound, was deeper than anything we'd felt yet, a low-frequency wave that pressed against bone and teeth more than ears. The lantern nearest the trucks flickered violently, its beam stretching thin before collapsing inward. "Get away from the flat," Rourke snapped. back to the hard pan on the western ridge. Now. We grabbed whatever we could carry and ran, not a reckless sprint, but the kind of fast, measured retreat animals use when they sense a predator watching. The surface beneath us vibrated, then steadied, then vibrated again in an offbeat pattern that made the hair rise on the back of my neck. When we reached the ridge, a slightly elevated section where the ground wasn't pure salt, the tremors ceased. Not faded. Not softened. Stopped. Completely. As if the flat itself respected a boundary it could not cross. From that vantage point, we watched the landscape we had been working on. And something was happening. The depression began widening, slowly at first, then more quickly, collapsing inward as the salt crust buckled and folded like fragile ice. Dust rose in gray columns, twisting gently in the still air. The drill bit vanished from sight as the ground swallowed it whole. A sound followed, an exhalation, long and low and enormous, like the sigh of a creature waking after a very long sleep. That whispering resonance rushed out again, louder this time, almost too structured, like a voice speaking through stone and pressure and centuries. I couldn't decipher it, not exactly, but there were patterns within it, like fragments of syllables echoing in slow, subterranean rhythm. Diaz covered his ears. Harlan dropped to her knees. Meyer stared forward in rapt terror, lips parted as though he were listening for meaning. "Stop listening," I hissed, grabbing his shoulder. "I can't," he whispered. It knows we heard it." That sentence chilled me in a way the desert air never could. Mork turned to all of us, his face pale beneath the dust. "We're leaving on foot. We move north until we reach the highway. No detours. No stopping. 20 miles, Harlan said through clenched teeth. "At least." "Then we start now," he replied. But before we could take even 3 steps, another tremor split the air, a sharp, sudden one that cracked the salt flat like a whip. A jagged fault line tore across the surface, racing outward from the collapsing depression and splitting open like the seam of a rotten fruit. And from that opening. No, not sound. Movement. Something shifted beneath the crust. Something enormous. A ripple moved through the salt, low and smooth and impossibly long, like a wave traveling beneath glass. It passed directly beneath our abandoned trucks, which shook violently before sliding sideways several inches. And then everything went still again. A stillness so complete it felt wrong to breathe within it. We remained frozen in place, our bodies tense, our minds refusing to process the impossible truth stretching across the flat like a wound. Whatever was beneath us wasn't a cavity. It wasn't geological. It wasn't dormant. It was alive. And it was waking. The last sliver of sunlight bled away behind distant ridges, casting the desert into a deepening blue. I felt the weight of the night settle over us, thick and suffocating, and I knew, deep in my bones, that darkness would not hide us. Darkness would amplify us. Magnify us. Because now it knew our shape. Our footsteps. Our weight on the crust. And worst of all, it knew we had heard its whisper. Night in the salt flat didn't fall, it erased. One moment the world was a dim, bruised lavender, the next it had been swallowed whole, leaving behind nothing but the metallic click of cooling equipment and our own ragged breaths. We had flashlights, but their beams seemed thinner than normal, like the darkness was pressing back, compressing the light into narrow, reluctant cones. When I lifted mine toward the flats, the beam dissolved halfway across the surface, scattering like dust in water. We began walking north. None of us argued the direction. Rourke had the best sense of terrain, and he moved with a tense, urgent certainty that left no room for debate. The ridge beneath our boots was firmer, composed of packed sediment and ancient gravel, a thin spine of solidity rising just enough to remain clear of the shifting salt basin. The tremors had stopped, but the silence had deepened into something thick and suffocating, a silence that wasn't absence but presence, as if the world were listening to us and didn't want to miss a single heartbeat. Harlan walked beside me, her flashlight shaking in her hand. "Do you think it's moving again?" she whispered. I don't know, I said, though every cell in my body screamed yes. Behind us, the salt flats sprawled like a frozen sea, pale and fragile and impossibly still. The cracks from the earlier rupture formed a jagged, branching web across the expanse, faintly visible in the starlight. They reminded me of capillaries, or fractures in bone. Some widened as we watched. Others narrowed, sealing themselves into smooth white crust. "Don't look back," Rourke ordered. "Just move." But looking away didn't help. The whispers followed us. They rose intermittently from the flat, not loud, not even distinctly audible, but perceptible in the bones, in the teeth, in the soft part of the ear where pressure becomes meaning. A low, undulating hum, rhythmic in a way that made my stomach twist. Too slow to be language, too structured to be noise. It felt like being underwater while distant voices murmured through the waves, intelligible only if you surrendered yourself to the drowning. Diaz stumbled once. Harlan caught his arm. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I keep hearing it say," he began, then shut his mouth hard, as if afraid the sound might escape. "Never mind." We walked for what felt like hours, though when I checked my watch, barely 30 minutes had passed. Time stretched unnaturally, elongated by fear and silence and the oppressive sense that the desert was no longer a landscape but an organism, and that we were threading across its spine. The night sky, usually a comfort in isolated places like this, felt cold and sharp, the stars like needles observing our slow retreat. At one point, the wind returned, or what I thought was wind. But it wasn't right. It didn't move across the terrain like natural wind. Instead, it rose suddenly, directly from the salt flat, a vertical gust that shimmered with fine grains of white dust. The dust rose in a column, dancing in a spiral, then fell all at once as if the breath had been sucked back down into the earth. Meyer froze. "It's following us," he whispered. Rourke didn't respond. He simply kept walking faster. I knew he was right though. The vibrations had begun again, faint, intermittent, but always behind us, never ahead. Each one came with a slight shift in the salt crust, a ripple that warped the starlight like heat haze. Something immense was passing beneath the surface, tracking us through the basin. We were ants skittering across a drumhead, and something below was pressing its ear to the skin. 2 hours in, the ridge narrowed. Ahead of us, the terrain dipped dangerously close to the salt crust. We would have to descend briefly into a shallow depression before climbing to the next dry section. That meant crossing the salt again, only a few yards of it, but enough to make everyone stop. "It's thin there," Harlan whispered. "The ground's thinner than where we drilled." Rourke swept his flashlight across the dip. The beam caught the faint shimmer of crystalline crust, cracked in delicate hexagonal patterns. We crossed quickly. No stopping. Keep weight distributed. No sudden jumps or running. Diaz exhaled shakily. "If it's hollow." "It doesn't matter," Rourke snapped, voice hard with fear he refused to show. "There's no other way." We gathered ourselves and stepped down the ridge. The moment my boot touched the salt again, a cold shock ran up my leg. The crust felt softer now, almost pliant, like frozen mud beginning to thaw. The surface gave the slightest bit under my weight, just enough to make me lift my foot as quickly as possible. "Don't lift," Rourke hissed. "Slide. Spread the pressure." We obeyed. 4 figures in a tense, slow migration, gliding step by trembling step across a surface that felt barely strong enough to hold a child, let alone 4 adults. Halfway through the depression, a tremor pulsed beneath us, short, sharp, deliberate. Cracks burst outward from under Harlan's feet. She gasped, flinging her arms out for balance. Diaz grabbed her wrist, steadying her as the cracks widened. "Don't stop," Rourke growled. "Move. Now." The second tremor came stronger, a rolling push from below that made the salt shudder like the skin of a living thing. Shadows rippled beneath the crust, not dark shapes, but distortions, as if something massive passed slowly just inches under our feet. I felt the whisper rise again, but now it was louder, not in sound, but in sensation. It pressed against my ribs, expanded behind my eyes, filled my skull with a quiet syllabic rhythm. My vision blurred at the edges. For a moment, I saw something like symbols, fleeting shapes that resembled language, something ancient. Something meant to be felt, not heard. Meyer staggered beside me. "It's telling us." "Shut it out," I hissed. "Don't listen." But he couldn't. His eyes were glassy, his pupils huge, as if his mind were tuned to the frequency below. We reached the edge of the flat just as a third tremor hit, this one so powerful the entire depression quivered like wet paper. The crust behind us caved inward, collapsing into a widening sinkhole that swallowed the ground we'd crossed only seconds before. Harlan screamed. Diaz pulled her up the ridge. I grabbed Meyer, who had gone limp with terror or trance, and hauled him forward until his boots scraped solid ground. When we reached safety, the sinkhole stopped widening. The tremors ceased. And then, in the hollow silence, we heard it clearly for the first time. A voice. From the sinkhole. From below. Not human. Not animal. Not anything that belonged to the world above. A slow, rising murmur, layered and resonant, as though countless tones were speaking at once, emerging from a depth that no drill could ever reach. It didn't speak in words. It didn't need to. The cadence carried meaning. Come back. Come closer. Come down. Meyer covered his face, sobbing into his hands. It knows us. It knows our weight, our steps, our names. It's calling us. Rourke had no orders left to give. He looked at the collapsed section of flats for a long, trembling moment, then turned away. "We keep moving," he whispered. "Before it learns how to reach the surface." So we did. But every step north carried the same terrible truth. It wasn't chasing us. It didn't need to. Because whatever lived beneath the salt flat, whatever whispered through the crust, it had infinite patience. And it had already begun teaching us how to dig our own way down. We reached the northern ridge just after 3 in the morning, though time had stopped feeling real hours before. My watch told me the hour, my body insisted we'd been walking for days. Fear stretches time like heat stretches metal, thin, brittle, ready to snap with a single wrong move. The cold sharpened as we climbed the ridge, and the air felt cleaner, freer, as if the salt flat's influence thinned with distance. But behind us, the basin pulsed with a faint, intermittent glow, almost imperceptible but undeniably there, soft, gray waves of shifting light radiating outward from the collapsed depression. We didn't speak anymore. Even Rourke, who never let silence linger in normal circumstances, looked demolished. His lips moved occasionally, like he was mumbling a prayer or maybe counting his breaths to keep himself grounded. The ridge narrowed again as it curved toward the north, and from there, we could see the expanse of the flat behind us, fractured, pitted, heaving in slow, uneven undulations like a living organism inhaling and exhaling beneath a crust of brittle bone. We were so tired. So terrified. But we were alive. For a moment, I dared to believe we might survive. But the desert remembered us. We stopped near an outcrop of volcanic rock, a natural barrier that gave us a clear view of the basin. Diaz collapsed onto the stone, cradling his head. Harlan sat beside him, wiping dust from her trembling hands. Meyer slumped against a boulder, eyes half-lidded, whispering fragments of the rhythm he'd heard under the ground. Every so often, he flinched, as if something inside his skull knocked for attention. "We rest 10 minutes, Rourke said quietly, voice hoarse. "Then we push on." But the desert didn't give us 10 minutes. We heard it first, a long, low exhalation carried on no wind, as if the night itself sighed. Then the vibration followed, faint but unmistakable, rolling up the ridge like distant thunder. The glow beneath the flats brightened, turning the basin into a pale, shifting plane of light. Something below was rising. I grabbed Meyer's shoulder. "Look at me." Do not listen. Do not look at the basin. His eyes fluttered, unfocused. It's close, he whispered. It knows we're up here. The ground pulsed. Not the salt flat now, the ridge itself. The vibrations reached us for the first time, subtle but definite. The hollow beneath the basin was expanding. Spreading. Learning the contours of the land. Get up, Rourke ordered. Everyone up. Move. We staggered to our feet. Diaz pulled Harlan upright, holding her as if she might shatter. The ridge sloped down ahead, promising another rise in a half-mile and black silhouette of what might have been highway fencing beyond it. We're almost out, I said. Just keep walking. But every word I spoke felt like a lie. We took our first steps down the slope. The desert quieted. The glowing pulse dimmed. And then we heard it, clearly, undeniably, horribly. A human voice. From the basin. Calling our names. It wasn't mimicking human sound the way animals sometimes do, it wasn't a trick of acoustics. It was precise, shaped around syllables it should never have known. First it said Rourke. Then Harlan. Then Diaz. Then Meyer. Then, God, mine. My blood turned to ice. Don't listen, Rourke said, though his voice broke on the last word. The voice rose again, layering itself with the whispers beneath it, the deep, old cadence that had haunted us since we arrived. The human names threaded through the subterranean murmur like bait, like hooks stitched into ancient fishing lines. And then the ground convulsed. Not a tremor, a jolt. The ridge cracked beneath us. Dust sprayed into the air. A fissure tore across the slope with a violent groan. Diaz grabbed Harlan, pulling her back as a slab of stone pitched forward into the basin. Run! Rourke shouted. Run now! We ran. No careful steps now, no distributed weight, just raw panic. Rocks tumbled under our boots. The ridge fractured behind us as something below shoved upward, splitting the terrain like a hand pushing through wet paper. The glow intensified. The whispers fused into a single, resonant tone. I didn't dare look over my shoulder. I didn't want to see what was rising. But I heard it, the slow, terrible sound of crust breaking and falling, the hiss of settling dust, the low, rhythmic exhale of something enormous adjusting its shape beneath the surface. The highway appeared over the next rise, a faint silver line in the moonlight. My lungs burned. My legs went numb. But the sight of that asphalt strip, that man-made promise of escape, kept me moving even as the desert roared behind us. Diaz reached the top of the rise first. He shouted something I couldn't make out. Harlan followed. I followed. Rourke wasn't behind me. I didn't stop. I couldn't. The ground behind us cracked open again, spraying salt and dust. The whisper became a shriek without air, not loud, but deep, vibrating every nerve at once. When we reached the highway, the noise stopped. Completely. Silence rushed in like a vacuum. I turned. The basin was still. The glow gone. The ridges frozen in perfect quiet. But one figure was missing. Rourke. I gasped. Rourke. We should have heard him. We should have seen movement. We should have. Diaz pointed at the ridge. A single depression had formed at the top. Small. Shallow. Like a footprint made by something enormous and weightless. It wasn't shaped like a boot. It wasn't shaped like any part of a human form, but it was the exact size of a man. The desert had taken him without a sound. For a long minute, none of us spoke. The night pressed around us, heavy and expectant. I felt the flat watching us, waiting to see if we would step back onto its surface, if we would foolishly return for the one it claimed. We didn't. We flagged down a truck near dawn. The driver took one look at us, dehydrated, dust-caked, trembling, and didn't ask questions. Later, when investigators returned to the site, the coordinates we gave them showed nothing. No ridge fractures. No sinkhole. No equipment. No trucks. No sign of human presence. Just a flat, perfect sheet of salt. Smooth as glass. Undisturbed. And the company that hired us? It never existed. At least, not on paper. All I know is this. Sometimes, late at night, when everything is still, the floor beneath me vibrates, faintly, rhythmically, like a whisper carried through stone. Not loud enough to hear. Just enough to feel. Just enough to remind me. The desert never stopped calling our names, it only learned to wait. Story 2. I took the job because I needed the money. That's always how these stories begin, isn't it? Some desperate decision made late at night, a choice that looks harmless on the surface until you're deep inside it, too far to crawl out. For me, it was the hospital changing schedules again, cutting my hours without warning, and rent due in 2 weeks. So when the agency called with a private overnight position for an elderly patient on the edge of town, I accepted before even asking the rate. Only later did I hear the warning tucked between the coordinator's words: he likes the curtains shut. He prefers quiet. He has some unusual boundaries. Boundaries. They made it sound like he was simply eccentric. But when I reached the Hawthorne house, sitting alone at the end of a narrow road lined with dead trees, those boundaries began to feel like something else entirely. The house itself was old, not antique in a charming way but old in a heavy, exhausted sense, the way a place feels after too many winters and too many secrets. Its windows were tall and narrow, smothered under layers of curtains that didn't match, as if someone had added more and more fabric over the years to block out something specific. The porch sagged in the middle. The brass knocker was shaped like a closed eye. No one greeted me at the door. I rang twice before a young man, maybe 20, opened it just wide enough for his face to appear. His skin looked unnaturally pale under the yellow foyer lights, his eyes shadowed like he hadn't slept in days. "Night shift?" he asked. His voice was hushed, like he was afraid of waking someone. "Yes," I replied. "Agency sent me for Mr. Hawthorne." He nodded, but didn't open the door further. "Before you come inside, I have to go over the rule." "Rule?" "Just one," he said. "Don't make eye contact with him. Ever. Even if he tries. Even if he begs." For a long moment, neither of us moved. The hallway lights behind him flickered slightly. The house groaned, settling its weight like an animal shifting in its sleep. I thought he was joking. People don't introduce medical instructions like that. But he didn't look like someone capable of humor right then. He looked terrified. Is he confused? Paranoid? I asked gently. Sometimes dementia. No, he cut in softly. It's not that. Just, don't look into his eyes. No matter what. He stepped aside then, allowing me in. The entryway smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender, the kind nursing homes use to mask the scent of age. The lights were dim, casting soft, shapeless shadows across the wooden floor. I noticed immediately that every mirror had been turned against the wall. Even small reflective surfaces, picture frames, cabinet doors, were either covered with cloth or faced downward as if they, too, had been warned. I followed the young man down a long corridor toward the guest room, where they kept Mr. Hawthorne. Every few steps, I caught the faintest metallic sound, like a soft scraping on the hardwood upstairs, followed by a stillness too complete to be natural. The house felt occupied by more than its residents, heavy with a gaze I couldn't place. "He'll write to communicate," the young man explained as we walked. "He uses notes. Doesn't speak much anymore. Did something happen to him?" "Something," he said quietly, "happened in him." I didn't have time to ask what he meant. He opened the guest room door and motioned for me to enter. The room was dim, the only source of light a small lamp placed deliberately behind the headboard so the glow washed outward instead of downward. The bed against the wall held the frail figure of an old man, Mr. Hawthorne, lying on his side, his face angled away, his breathing shallow and slow. His hair was thin, drifting like spider silk across the pillow. One of his hands rested on the blankets, twitching faintly. A small notebook and pen lay on the table beside him. "He'll write if he needs anything," the young man repeated. "You don't have to talk much. And if he starts to turn toward you, step to the side and wait. Don't let him look at you directly." "Has he hurt anyone?" I asked. "No," he whispered, "but he's different now. Since the accident on the balcony." He backed out of the room before I could ask more, closing the door softly. For a while, nothing moved. The house was quiet in that unnerving way where the silence feels intentional, not empty. I checked Mr. Hawthorne's vitals, careful to stay behind him. His breathing was steady, though irregular, and his pulse fluttered beneath my fingers like the wings of a trapped moth. His skin felt cold. After a few minutes, he shifted. Not much, just a slight adjustment of his fingers, brushing against the blanket as if searching for something. Then his hand moved toward the notebook. Slowly. Trembling. I picked it up for him. I held the pen against his palm. He closed his fingers around it. Scratching filled the room as he wrote, slow, shaky strokes, the pen dragging like he was fighting against some invisible weight. After nearly a full minute, he let the pen fall. I lifted the notebook. A short sentence sprawled across the page in uneven lettering. "Don't let it look at you." My skin prickled. "Let what look at me?" I asked softly. His hand twitched again. Then he wrote. "Not me." A chill went through me. "What came into the house, Mr. Hawthorne?" I whispered. He wrote slower this time, as though the act of revealing it took something out of him. "It came from the balcony." Before I could respond, something shifted, just slightly, in the far corner of the room. A glint of something reflective caught my eye. I turned my flashlight toward it. It was a chrome handle on a metal tray I'd set down earlier. My reflection stared back at me from its curved surface, faint, warped. Except, my reflection blinked slower than I did. A fraction too slow. A fraction too deliberate. My heart hammered. I pulled the flashlight away quickly, breath trembling. Behind me, Mr. Hawthorne shifted. I felt, without seeing, that he was beginning to turn his head, ever so slightly, as if drawn by my fear. I stepped aside before he could face me. His hand groped for the notebook again. The pen dragged over paper. Letters formed shakily. "It likes when you look." For the next hour, nothing moved except the shadows crawling slowly across the walls as the lamp behind the bed dimmed inch by inch. I checked Mr. Hawthorne's vitals again, staying behind him, keeping my gaze fixed on the pale slope of his shoulder, the tremor that ran through his fingers every few minutes. He seemed weaker than he had earlier, his breaths shallow and uneven, as though whatever he'd written, whatever truth he'd scratched onto that notepad, had drained him. But the worst part wasn't him. It was the house. Old houses settle and sigh, everyone knows that. But this one felt reactive. Every time I moved, the floorboards creaked a second too late, like the wood was waiting to imitate me rather than simply shifting under my weight. When I paused, the air thickened behind me, pressing against the back of my neck in an almost human way, as if a breath I couldn't hear was brushing just beyond the veil of silence. Around midnight, I made myself a cup of tea in the kitchen. The young man had already left, he worked days, so I was alone, the whole house yawning around me, vast and hungry. The kitchen was worse than the bedroom. No windows at all, just blinds nailed shut over the frames. No chrome appliances, only old enamel, dulled and scratched like someone had deliberately chosen non-reflective surfaces. I rinsed my mug, reaching automatically for a dish towel to dry it. There was a faint curve of metal along the oven door, not polished, but still able to catch the shine of the overhead bulb. I didn't mean to look. My eyes just drifted. Habit. Reflex. My reflection stared back, warped by the curve of the metal. And it was smiling. I wasn't. I froze, mug in hand, heart hammering in my throat. The reflection's smile faded slowly, almost thoughtfully, then it lifted one hand, my hand, but the motion lagged behind my own. I dropped the mug. It shattered against the tile, the sound unnaturally loud in a house that seemed to devour every other noise. The reflection didn't react. It simply blinked once, too slow, too deliberate. And then, as if responding to something behind me, it tilted its head. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Instead, I backed out of the kitchen, step by trembling step, until I reached the hallway again. The mug shards lay scattered across the tile like little bone fragments. I didn't go back for them. I didn't go back into the kitchen for the rest of the night. When I returned to Mr. Hawthorne's room, he had written another message. I didn't see him write it, the pen was still in his hand, the notebook flipped to a fresh page as though something had pulled his mind out of fragile sleep. The message was simple, and it made my stomach drop. Don't look in the glass. It's not you. My hands shook as I set the notebook down. What is it? I whispered. What came into the house? He wrote again, slower, more painfully, each letter dragging like he was carving it into stone. It wants a face. I didn't understand, not then. But I would. Not long after, a soft scrape sounded from the hallway, not footsteps, but something brushing against the wall. I opened the door just enough to see the shadow stretching from the far end of the corridor. It elongated across the floor in a way no shadow should, bending around corners, spilling forward like ink in water. It wasn't human-shaped. Not exactly. It was too tall. Too narrow. And its movements lagged, like it was mimicking the shape of walking without understanding the intent behind each step. Mr. Hawthorne tapped the bed frame weakly. I hurried back to him. He pointed shakily at the curtains. They were fully drawn. No light seeped through. No silhouette pressed against the fabric. I leaned close so he could write again. Once more, the pen scraped across the page in jagged, broken lines. Don't let it learn you. A cold dread seeped through me. Learn me how? He didn't answer in writing. Instead, his fingers twitched toward my phone in my pocket. I took it out. The screen reflected both of us. Except, not both. In the reflection, I stood by the bedside, pale, shaken. But the reflection of the old man was wrong. He was facing me. Eyes wide. Mouth stretched open in a silent scream. And something behind him, something tall, thin, half-formed, leaned over his shoulder. I dropped the phone so fast it skittered across the floor, sliding under the dresser. Behind me, the real Mr. Hawthorne wheezed, his voice barely more than a breath. Don't look at it. Then something tapped against the window. A single, light tap. Then another. Then a slow, dragging scrape across the glass, as though a fingertip, or something pretending to be a fingertip, were tracing a path along the pane. A shadow slid across the curtains, tall, thin, jerky. Learning. Practicing. Imitating. I held my breath. I didn't move. And in the ice-cold hush of that room, one final truth sank in, heavy as a stone dropped into deep water. It wasn't trying to scare me. It was trying to become me. The scraping at the window didn't stop. It only grew more deliberate, more curious, each slow drag tracing the shape of something, learning the concept of movement. I stood frozen beside the bed, careful to angle my body so Mr. Hawthorne couldn't turn enough to see me fully. He was trembling now, his breaths shallow and panicked, not because of the pain or age, but because he knew the rhythm of those movements, recognized them the way a person recognizes a familiar sickness returning after years of remission. The scraping paused. Then came a soft tapping, Not knuckles, not fingernails, but something imitating those motions. The taps were too widely spaced, too unevenly timed, staggered like a child trying to learn a melody by ear. My phone remained trapped under the dresser. I wasn't going to crawl after it. Not with the window tapping. Not with that shadow still stretching across the curtains in long, trembling strokes. Mr. Hawthorne's fingers nudged the notebook again. I held it out, bracing myself. The pen wavered in his hand, making feeble scratches before forming words jagged enough to look painful. "Don't speak." I looked at him, startled. "It can hear us," I whispered before I could stop myself. His whole body jolted with urgency as he forced the pen against the page. "It can't yet. But it learns fast." The tapping stopped immediately after he finished writing. A hush followed, so complete it felt like a vacuum against my eardrums. It wasn't silence. Silence is passive. This was listening. Something on the balcony was listening. And when it resumed tapping, the rhythm had changed. It tapped 3 times. Paused. Then tapped once more. Exactly the pattern of my own voice when I'd asked, "It can hear us?" It wasn't mocking me. It was repeating me. Learning the shape of my question without knowing the meaning. Mr. Hawthorne shakily pressed the notebook again. "Don't react." But it was too late, not because I moved, but because my heart reacted. It felt like the thing outside could hear my pulse pounding against my ribs. I kept my eyes low. In the dim lamplight, I noticed something I hadn't before: tiny scratches along the baseboards, clustered near reflective surfaces, where picture frames once hung, where mirrors once sat, where the television once stood before being turned to face the wall. They weren't random claw marks or signs of age. They looked like something had been practicing shapes, practicing how to form lines and angles and curves the way human hands might. Something inside this house had been studying reflections long before I arrived. It was learning how to be seen properly. A faint creak sounded from the hallway. I stiffened. The door was still open, just a crack, the slimmest vertical sliver of darkness where the hall light should have shone true. Except now, something blocked the hall light entirely. A shadow leaned in the doorway. It didn't move like a person. It didn't sway with breath or pulse. It hovered, with faint jerks, like each motion required recall, like it was remembering how to emulate weight. I angled my body slightly, enough to shield Mr. Hawthorne from the doorway. His hand tightened around my wrist, not forcefully, but urgently, as if grounding himself in the reality that I was still a living person and not the thing approaching. The shadow twitched. Then lengthened. Then lifted something that looked like an arm, too thin, too segmented. Then I heard it. A breath, not from the doorframe, not from the corner, but behind me, near the dresser. A soft exhale that matched the sound I made earlier when I'd seen the reflection smiling. A breath mimicking mine. I spun around, too fast, and caught the glint of metal under the dresser where my phone lay. My reflection stared back from the black screen. Except it wasn't me anymore. It was closer to me now. More accurate. No lag, no delayed blink. Except one detail. The smile. It still smiled. Slowly. Knowingly. And as I watched, the reflection's shoulders lifted in a slow imitation of breathing. It tilted its head like a person hearing a distant call, then looked past me toward the open bedroom door. The shadow in the hallway moved in response. They weren't separate. They were the same thing practicing different shapes. The reflection was the face learning part. The shadow was the body learning part. And they were converging. Mr. Hawthorne thrashed suddenly, knocking over the lamp behind him. The room plunged into a suffocating half-darkness. The only illumination came from the faint hallway glow and the weak starlight filtering through the curtains. He reached desperately for the notebook. I held it to his hand. The pen shook violently. Balcony. It came through the glass. Something brushed against the curtains again, long, deliberate strokes that dragged down the entire length of the fabric. Not scratching now. Not tapping. Feeling. Tracing. Studying. I whispered, "What does it want?" His answer came slowly, the letters uneven from fear and pain. A host. A copy. A body to wear. Behind me, my phone's black screen lit up suddenly, no sound, no notification, just an image of the camera feed turning on, and in the live reflection, the shadow in the doorway turned its head at the exact same angle I did. Perfectly in sync. No lag now. It had learned the timing. The reflection's mouth opened just slightly, parting in a shape that looked like my voice before the sound came. It was trying to speak. Not with its own voice. With mine. Something whispered from the balcony. A soundless mimicry of breath before words. And in that moment, I realized something terrible. It didn't just want to imitate me. It wanted to replace me. And it had already learned enough to try. I'd like to say I kept my composure when the reflection on my phone turned its head in perfect sync with mine, but the truth is simpler and more pathetic. I froze. Completely. My lungs locked. My pulse hammered so loudly that I wondered if the thing in the doorway could feel the vibrations through the floorboards. There's a moment, just before terror breaks you, when the body becomes a single, rigid note vibrating in its own bones. I hovered there, strung tight between stillness and collapse. The reflection on the screen smiled wider. My mouth didn't move at all. It leaned in closer, my face but brighter, clearer, unburdened by fear. It looked like a version of me refined, smoothed, polished. A version without exhaustion, or hesitation, or the tiny flaws that make someone real. The phone camera adjusted to the light, and for a moment, it was as if the device preferred that version, the copy, over the trembling person holding the truth of the moment. Behind me, the shadow in the hallway flexed, its limbs adjusting in small, jerky increments like a puppet testing new strings. It was learning coordination. It was learning weight. It was learning me. Mr. Hawthorne clawed weakly at my sleeve, urging me to look at him instead. I tore my eyes away from the phone and knelt at his bedside, careful to stay behind him so he couldn't accidentally face me. His breath rattled, strained and urgent, as if he was fighting both fear and a diminishing clock inside himself. The pen dropped from his hand. His arm trembled as he tried to lift it again, but he couldn't. So he dragged the notebook closer and, with the edge of his knuckles, scratched a single word in shaky arcs across the page. "Run." I whispered, "I can't leave you." He lifted his hand again, barely, and wrote two more words with the strength of someone forcing life through his bones. "It waits. For you." A soft stroke on the curtains made my skin crawl. Then another. Then a slow, steady pressure, like something pressing its face against the fabric, testing the contours beneath. The shadow in the doorway elongated, stretching upward until it grazed the top of the frame. Its outline sharpened. Shoulders narrowed. Arms took shape, but too long at first, then shrinking as though adjusting to proportions it was remembering from somewhere. Or from someone. My breath came in thin, trembling pulls. I reached for the bedside drawer, looking for something, anything, that wasn't reflective. My fingers brushed the handle. Metal. Cold. Polished. I snatched my hand back. Everything in this house had become a trap. My phone buzzed suddenly. A vibration without a notification. The screen lit up again. This time the reflection spoke, not in sound, but in the slow opening and closing of its mouth. And then, after a hesitation that felt intentional, my voice came out of it. Not from the phone. From the hallway. A perfect imitation of my voice whispered. "Are you me?" I clamped a hand over my mouth to stop the scream rising inside me. The shape in the doorframe tilted its head. The reflection on the phone mirrored the tilt, exactly, perfectly. Then my voice came again, clearer. I can be you. The hallway figure stepped forward. Not jerky now. Not clumsy. Smooth. Fluid. Practiced. Every step matched the movement I would make on that wooden floor. Every shift of weight matched the rhythm of my joints. It had taken my gait. My proportions. My breath pattern. It was only missing a face. The curtains fluttered as something pressed harder against the window behind them, as if impatient, eager. 2 long lines traced down the fabric, fingers. Or something approximating fingers. It was watching the hallway figure learn to walk like me, trying to mimic the skill through the barrier of cloth. A second presence learning my body. A third presence learning my face. All pieces reaching toward one final shape. Mr. Hawthorne began shaking violently. His hand slapped weakly at the notebook, smearing ink across the page as he tried to write. I brought it closer. His letters came fractured, desperate. Don't look. If you look, IT chooses. The thing in the hallway froze the moment he finished writing, as if those words triggered recognition. It lifted its head, almost sniffing the air like a predator triangulating sound. My phone vibrated again. A voice message opened on its own. It was my voice whispering inside the device now. Turn around, it said softly. I want to see me. Mr. Hawthorne seized my arm with surprising force. He pulled me down beside him, shielding my face behind his frail shoulder. He whispered, really whispered, voice scraping like old paper. Don't let it see both of you at once. It will finish. The shadow in the hallway took another step. The curtains trembled. My reflection on the foam leaned closer, smiling wider with a mouth that was becoming too real. And I realized something that hollowed me out instantly. I didn't know which version of me it was copying anymore. The one outside the window. The one in the hallway. The one in the screen. Or the one kneeling here, trembling in the dark. The mimicry was no longer a process. It had become a loop. An accelerating exchange where each false version taught the others the flaws of the original. And the original was beginning to doubt herself. The moment I understood that the mimicry had entered its final stage was not when the shadow moved, nor when the reflection smiled, nor even when my own voice whispered from the hallway. It was when Mr. Hawthorne stopped shaking. His body went still suddenly, unnervingly still, like he realized the outcome had already been decided. His grip on my arm loosened, and he let out a rattling, defeated sigh that carried the weight of someone who had lived too long with something that wanted to wear him like clothing. He lifted the pen one last time. A single word scratched itself across the page, jagged and trembling. Sorry. I didn't understand what he was apologizing for. Not then. Not until it was far too late. The figure in the hallway stepped into the room. The air shifted as it entered, like the pressure changed, like the house itself had been waiting years for this moment. It looked almost human now. Almost me. My height, my posture, my steps, my shadow. But the face. The face was still wrong. Blank. Uncommitted. A canvas waiting for the final stroke. It paused there, its head turning in small, mechanical increments as if comparing angles, matching breaths. The curtains rustled behind me. The thing outside pressed harder against the windowpane. The fabric stretched inward, bowing with each push. Shapes traced themselves across the curtain, thin lines becoming cheekbones, an outline becoming a skull, a hollow cavity where eyes would soon be. 2 copies. Free. All converging. The screen under the dresser glowed again, illuminating the underside of the bed with pulsing white light. My reflection, perfect now, or nearly, stared out at me with an expression of pure, eager hunger. Mr. Hawthorne grabbed my wrist with sudden, fading strength. His eyes, gray, unfocused, glossed with fear, fixed on the doorway. He whispered, barely audible. Don't move. Don't look. Don't answer. The thing in the doorway took another step. And then it spoke. With my voice. Not the version from earlier, this one was smoother. More natural. Perfectly paced. Are you me? My jaw clenched. I didn't breathe. It took another step. Then another. Bare feet sliding across the wooden floor with a soft whispering sound, like someone dragging a cloth over dry leaves. Behind the curtain, the balcony glass creaked sharply. Then again. Something outside was pushing against it, trying to force its way in. The thing in the doorway tilted its head. Its motions now fluid. Comfortable. Confident. Why are you hiding? It whispered in my voice. I'm not dangerous. I'm you. My throat tightened. I could feel my heartbeat in my teeth. Then it said something that nearly broke me. Come here. I felt Mr. Hawthorne's hand clamp down on mine again, tighter than a dying man should have been capable of. He pushed the notebook toward me. One last message, scrawled with desperate, violent strokes. Do not answer. If you answer, IT knows which one is real. My breath hitched. The copy took 2 more steps, close enough that I could smell the wrongness of it, something like dust and cold porcelain, something that had never been alive trying to simulate warmth. Behind me, the window gave a long, low groan. The curtains fluttered as a heavy weight shifted against the glass. For a moment, I thought the balcony version would break through and the hallway version would reach me at the same time. But something else happened instead. The hallway figure paused. Its head slowly turned, not toward me, but toward Mr. Hawthorne. It took 1 step closer to the bed. No, he breathed. No, no, don't. The copy leaned forward. And in my perfect voice, full of gentle warmth, it said, "Thank you." Then it touched him. I didn't see exactly what happened. I only heard the sound. A soft, terrible collapse, like fabric folding in on itself. A gasp that never finished. A weight leaving the mattress. When I looked again, Mr. Hawthorne was gone. Not dead. Not harmed. Just gone. The blanket sank as if nothing had ever been there. The copy turned its face toward me. Only now it had eyes. His eyes. And a mouth shaped like mine. And a faint, uncanny smile that blended both into something seamless. Your turn, it whispered. The balcony glass shattered behind the curtain. A rush of cold air filled the room. Something climbed in, something tall, thin, unfinished. I didn't think. I just ran. I bolted out of the room, down the hallway, down the stairs, out the front door. I didn't look back even when I heard footsteps behind me, mine, but too light, too swift. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs shook and the world blurred. I don't remember reaching the road. I don't remember calling for help. I don't remember the EMTs shining lights into my eyes. I only remember one thing. The copy never chased me outside. Because it didn't need to. It took 3 days for the police to enter the Hawthorne house. They found no bodies. No broken glass. No overturned furniture. No reflective surfaces at all. Just a bed with the blanket smoothed flat, as if no one had slept there. A dresser with no phone beneath it. A curtain drawn quietly across a perfectly intact window. Everything looked untouched. Except for one detail. On the inside of the front door, written in shaky letters across the wood, someone had carved 2 words. Found you. They asked me if I wrote it. I said no. But the truth is worse. Because every night since then, on a subway window, or a store mirror, or the black screen of my phone, I see it. Not behind me. Not beside me. Replacing me. Sometimes the reflection is a second too fast. Sometimes a second too slow. Sometimes it smiles when I don't. And I don't know. I truly don't. If I walked out of that house alive, or if something else did. Story 3. I've hiked the Appalachians for most of my life, long enough to know the difference between natural silence and roam silence. Natural silence is simple, the hush of a foggy morning, the lull between bird calls, the stillness after rain. You can feel life pulsing beneath it. But the silence I walked into that day. No. Silence isn't even the right word. It was absence. A kind of nothingness so total that even my thoughts seemed muted, as if the air itself were swallowing them before they could form. The trail started normally enough. Early autumn, orange leaves carpeting the ground, the smell of damp earth rising with every step. The sky was low and gray, but not storm-heavy, just quiet. I had driven 4 hours to reach this stretch near the Tennessee, North Carolina border, a place most hikers overlooked because the terrain was uneven and far from any marked campsite. That's why I liked it. Solitude. Stillness. But this time, the solitude felt curated. Staged. Like the forest was waiting for me to notice something. 2 hours in, the forest sounds began thinning. First the insects. Then the birds. Then the wind itself. Trees usually grown in the Appalachian slopes, bending and creaking with the weight of their own age, but even they fell silent. I kept checking my ears, wondering if altitude or exhaustion had dulled my hearing, but the crunch of leaves under my boots sounded normal. Too normal. Every footstep echoed sharply, unnaturally, as if the world had become hollow beneath me. At some point I stopped walking altogether. I looked around slowly, cautiously. And I realized something that made my breath catch. I couldn't hear myself breathing. Not even faintly. I placed a hand on my chest, felt the rise and fall, but the air made no sound passing through my throat. Panic fluttered in my ribs. I exhaled harder, forcing air through my teeth. Nothing, no whisper of breath, no huff of exertion. But my heartbeat pounded in my head, loud enough to feel like it belonged to someone else. That's when I found the stream. It appeared like a silver thread woven between the rocks, thin, narrow, perfectly clear. Water should babble. Trickles should murmur. Even the quietest creek should make some sound. But this stream flowed in perfect, absolute silence. Not muted. Not soft. Silent. The kind of silence that makes the world lean closer, listening. I crouched beside it. The water moved steady and quick, carving a delicate ribbon through the mossy banks, bubbling against stones, but not a single bubble made a sound. I dipped my fingers into the stream. The water was freezing, painfully cold, but even my touch made no ripple noise. No splash. Not even the faint gurgle of displaced current. For reasons I still can't explain, I whispered to myself, trying to force my voice into the world as if testing whether sound still existed. Hello, my lips moved. I felt the vibration in my throat. But nothing emerged. I pulled my hand back sharply, heart racing. The water clung to my skin longer than it should have, as if reluctant to let go. I followed the stream. I don't know why. Some instinct deeper than curiosity tugged at me. Like the silence itself was a trail. The forest grew denser as I walked, branches leaning inward until the path narrowed into a corridor of dark greens and browns. The deeper I went, the more I felt watched, not by animals, but by the absence of them. The stream widened gradually, as though gathering strength. After 20 minutes, I saw the village. A cluster of weathered cabins nestled between the trees. Not ruined. Not overgrown. Just abandoned, as if the occupants had stepped outside one morning and never returned. Dishes sat on tables. Blankets were pulled back slightly on beds. Tools lay waiting for hands that never came. Everything preserved in a stillness that felt intentional. My first thought was that it might be an old heritage site, one of those preserved towns from the 1930s or earlier, but the silence didn't feel historical. It felt ongoing. The stream cut through the village, brushing past wooden porches and stone steps. The water glided noiselessly around the structures like it knew where it belonged. As I stepped onto the main dirt path, I noticed marks carved into every wooden surface, outer walls, door frames, fence posts, beams. The same symbol, repeated hundreds of times. A circle. Split by a straight vertical line. Crude, but deliberate. Like someone scratched it into the world as a warning. My stomach tightened the moment I saw it. I didn't know why. Not yet. But something in my bones understood the message before my mind could. Stay out. Turn back. Do not listen to the quiet. The air grew colder as I approached the largest cabin, the only one with its door slightly ajar. A faint breeze should have moved it, nudged it, whispered through the crack. But the door stayed still, suspended in complete stillness. The quiet pressed harder around me, thick as fog, dense as water. I had the strangest feeling that sound wasn't just absent, it was being held somewhere. Stored. Hoarded. Inside the cabin, the air felt heavier. Dust particles hummed motionless in the dim light. A log sat half-burned in the fireplace as though mid-crackle when someone simply stopped time. A journal lay open on the table. I don't know why I reached for it. I should have run. I should have turned back the moment the air stole the sound of my breath. But the silence had already taken hold of me. As if guided, I lifted the journal and began reading the last written page. The writing was frantic, the ink smeared, the letters sharp and trembling, as though someone wrote in absolute terror. The water took our voices first. Then it took the sound from our footsteps. Then the birds. Then the wind. It is hungry for noise. It grows stronger in silence. We cannot hear each other anymore. We cannot hear ourselves. My throat tightened. I felt the stream's cold echo deep inside my ears. Then I read the final lines, short, struck through, written twice over as if the writer's hand shook violently. The cave is its mouth. The stream is its tongue. Do not drink. Do not let the silence inside you. A creak came from behind me. Not a sound, but a vibration through the floorboards. Slow. Steady. Approaching. I turned toward the door. Something stood just outside the frame. Not a person. Not an animal. A shadow. But not cast by light. A shadow shaped by absence. Like a silhouette carved out of the quiet itself. And before I could move, before I could breathe, the last thing I saw was its head tilting. As if listening to the sound it had stolen from me. For a moment, I thought the shadow in the doorway was just a trick of the dim light, a shape cast by my own fear. But the longer I stared, the more I understood it was not the product of light. There was no light in the cabin strong enough to cast anything. It was simply there, an outline carved out of the world, its edges too clean, too certain, too deliberate, and it stood with a stillness that went beyond physical stillness. It was the stillness of absence incarnate, as though the silence of the entire village had condensed into a single, observing form. I backed away slowly, the journal trembling in my hands. My heartbeat thundered in my chest, but I didn't hear a single pound. Not one echo in the air. My own fear had no voice here. The shadow didn't move. It simply tilted its head, the gesture sharp and unnatural, like a puppet string being pulled at an angle not built for human joints. Something inside me whispered, instinct, intuition, the deep animal sense that kept our ancestors alive in caves, don't run. Don't run yet. I set the journal down. My fingers released it silently, the book made no thud, no tap, nothing. Even sound that should exist here was rejected by the air. As if the environment swallowed each noise before it was born. I shifted my weight. The floor beneath me creaked. No. It vibrated. The wood moved against my boot but produced no sound. It was as if the entire cabin were submerged in something thick, some invisible medium that suffocated each vibration before it could become audible. My breathing deepened. Panic surged. I can't hear myself. I can't hear anything. And for the first time, the shadow stepped forward. It didn't glide, it didn't loom. It stepped with the tentative, jerky motion of something unfamiliar with legs, as though it were imitating the act of walking from memory alone. With each slow step, the silence in the cabin thickened, pressurized. My skull felt tight, my inner ear pulsing as if underwater. I stumbled backward out of sheer instinct, and the shadow immediately mirrored me, not matching my posture, but matching the rhythm, as if tracking sound it could no longer steal. I backed toward the door, the air so heavy with silence it felt like trying to wade through syrup. My throat tightened painfully as I tried to yell, but nothing emerged. Not even the faint sensation of my voice inside my own ears. I reached the threshold and spun, grabbing the doorframe for balance. Outside, the village was drenched in the same oppressive stillness. The stream cut through the earth with its silver gleam, flowing rapidly yet soundlessly, as though water itself had lost the ability to speak. Every cabin stared at me with dark windows like blind eyes. I stepped onto the porch. The shadow remained in the doorway. It did not cross the threshold. As I stepped away, it leaned forward, not walking toward me, just bending, its shape stretching like taffy in the dim cabin light. Its head tilted again, almost curious. Almost hungry. I felt something then, something subtle, deep inside my skull. A distant ringing, faint, irregular, like the dying heartbeat of a sound. It wasn't the world, it was me. I shook my head sharply, desperate to clear the sensation, but the ringing only sputtered into softer fragments before fading entirely. My ears felt hollow. Empty. As if something had scooped the highest frequencies out of them. I took another step back. The shadow recoiled slightly, not in fear, but in a deliberate, calculated shift, as if measuring the distance between us, testing the space, sensing something change in me. I turned and ran. But even my running made no sound. My boots hit the ground with complete quiet. Breath tore through my chest noiselessly. Branches whipped against my jacket in total silence. Nature itself had been stripped away. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs trembled, until the trees blurred into streaks of dark brown and green. Every footstep I felt but could not hear. It was like being trapped inside a muted dream. Finally, I reached the edge of the village, the last cabin perched near the stream. I forced myself to slow, gasping for air I could not hear, feeling panic spiral dangerously inside my chest. I pressed a hand to my ear, desperate for anything, any sensation of sound, even the sharp pain of tinnitus, but there was nothing. Then I saw it. A second journal, wedged beside the door of this final cabin. Weather-worn, pages soft from moisture. I opened it with trembling fingers. The writing inside was from a different hand, tighter, smaller, more precise. The final entry sent a cold shiver down what was left of my senses. When the silent water touched my lips, the world lost its voice. When it touched my ears, it took the high sounds. When it touched my memory, it began to fill the empty spaces. The stream leads to its cave, the place where sound is eaten. It lures the lost. It feeds on the unheard. Then, a final, cramped sentence. If you can still hear anything, leave now. If you cannot, it's already inside you. I dropped the journal, heart racing. A soft vibration, barely perceptible, passed through the ground beneath me, up my legs, and into my chest. At first I thought it was just my pulse. But no. It pulsed in a rhythm that was not mine. Slow. Measured. Deliberate. Coming from the direction of the stream. The shadow had not followed me. It didn't need to. Because the silence had taken root inside my skull. A tremor rippled through the water as I approached the bend in the stream. No sound, just motion. A new absence bloomed inside my ears. This time lower pitched. A mid-frequency tone disappearing like dust snuffed out in a breeze I could no longer hear. I was going deaf. Not naturally. Systematically. Layer by layer. The silence was carving me out from the inside. And somewhere behind me, just faint enough to feel but not hear, the shadow stepped outside the cabin. It had waited for me to lose another slice of hearing. It was waiting for the next. I followed the stream because I didn't know what else to do. Maybe that sounds foolish now, but when the world stops making sound, when even your own breath disappears, you cling to whatever movement you can still perceive. The water was the only thing that still looked alive, even if it no longer sounded alive. It wound through the trees like a vein carrying the forest's last pulse. And without realizing it, I had begun walking as if the stream were a guide, or a lure. Each step felt heavier. Not physically, but perceptually, like my senses were slipping one by one into a deep well. The forest around me blurred at the edges, and the quiet pressed in like thick fog wrapping itself around my skull. The ringing inside my ears flickered again, high and thin, before disappearing entirely. Another frequency gone. My hearing range tightening like a noose. Minutes passed. Or hours. Or something between. At some point, I tried to speak, to test my voice, to check if anything of me still existed in the air. My lips formed words. My throat moved. I felt the vibration. But there was no feedback, no echo inside my head. My voice didn't feel like it belonged to me anymore. It felt like I was mouthing a language no one could hear, not even myself. As the forest thickened, the stream angled sharply toward a rising slope. Moss clung to every stone, glistening with cold droplets that should have dripped with audible rhythm. But everything existed in the suffocating vacuum of silence, and the droplets slid down noiselessly, like tears that never hit the ground. Branches cracked under my boots. Except they didn't. Not in any way I could hear. I felt each snap through vibration alone, through the tremor in the sole of my boot. My world had shrunk into touch and sight, and even sight felt compromised, as if every shape blurred slightly at its edges. I stumbled on the incline, catching myself against a tree trunk slick with cold dew. As my fingers brushed the bark, I felt something carved there, harsh lines, sharp grooves dug deep into the wood. I turned the beam of my headlamp toward it. The same symbol. A circle with a vertical line through it. But this one was different. The edges were gouged violently, almost desperate. Below it, in rushed, jagged strokes. Here's what you can't. I jerked my hand back. My pulse fluttered. I leaned closer, feeling, not hearing, my own breath quicken. Then I noticed something else. Farther up the path, dozens more trees bore the same marks. Some carved deep. Some shallow. All pointing upward, toward the ridge, toward the cave. I don't know when I first saw it. It emerged in stages. First a dark shape between the trees. Then a black mouth in the hillside. Then a void so complete it made the silence inside me feel suddenly insignificant. The cave swallowed light. Not metaphorically. Literally. My headlamp beam hit the mouth of it and simply died, absorbed, as though the darkness inside refused to reflect anything back. My stomach dropped. This was where the stream came from. The journal had said as much, but seeing it made the truth settle like ice behind my ribs. The cave is its mouth. The stream is its tongue. I took one step toward it. My hearing dropped another layer. Not gradually. It felt like a switch flipping. One moment I could feel the faint internal hum of my own body, blood moving, breath shifting, the internal noises you don't realize exist until they begin to fade. The next moment. Gone. Nothing. A void swallowing even the sound inside my skull. I staggered, gripping a tree trunk for balance. My vision pulsed with each heartbeat, the only remaining rhythm my body could still perceive. The silence wasn't just outside me now, it was sinking deeper, filling me, displacing something essential. Then, from somewhere behind me, a vibration rippled through the ground. Not the light tremor of a footstep. No. A slow, deliberate compression. As though something heavy pressed its weight into the forest floor. I turned slowly. The shadow from the village stood at the edge of the tree line. Except now it had shape. Arms. Legs. A torso. A head tilted with eerie curiosity. It still didn't have a face, but its outline was sharper than before. Cleaner. More confident, as if the silence inside me had fed it somehow, given it form. It didn't move. It simply watched, its head tilting slightly with each second, mimicking the tilt of my panic even if I hadn't moved a muscle. I stepped backward toward the cave. The shadow stepped forward. Not immediately. But after a delay. Like it was choosing the right timing, matching me. Learning me. My throat tightened. I tried to shout again, but my voice was a ghost trapped behind my teeth. No vibration, no sound, nothing to confirm that I existed in the world in any audible way. Another frequency slipped away. Everything above the range of low hums vanished. Not that there were any hums left. My world shrank further. The shadow advanced again. Not quickly, but inevitably, like a tide rolling in. I backed deeper toward the cave mouth. Cold air poured from it, colder than any natural air, cold like the breath of deep earth that hasn't seen daylight in centuries. And then I felt it. Not heard, but felt in my bones. A low vibration from within the cave. A presence. A massive, slow awareness turning toward me. The shadow in the forest paused at the boundary where the moss met the cave's barren stone. It didn't cross. It swayed slightly, like a creature sensing another predator. A realization struck me with numbing clarity. The shadow wasn't the source. It was just another victim, another thing made hollow by the silence. Another being emptied out until it became a shape without sound. The real hunger waited inside the cave. I felt the pressure build inside my skull as another layer of hearing vanished. Now even the sound of my heartbeat was gone. My world was a picture without a soundtrack. The cave breathed. The darkness inside expanded, inhaling the silence I carried with me. And I understood what the villagers meant. The silence wasn't spreading through the forest. It was spreading through me. And the cave could feel that I was almost ready to be taken. The cave's breath hit me first. A cold so deep it wasn't temperature anymore, but intent. A cold that felt like it wanted inside me, wanted to hollow me out the way it had hollowed out the stream, the village, the forest. The shadow lingered at the tree line behind me, swaying in its half-formed stillness. It didn't follow. It wouldn't. Some boundary, old, instinctive, not meant for humans, kept it back. I didn't take comfort from that. Predators don't chase prey into another predator's den. The cave floor sloped downward gently at first, then dropped sharply into darkness. I didn't remember making the decision to enter. I just stepped forward because the silence inside me dragged me toward the place that birthed it. My hearing kept collapsing in layers, like old plaster flaking from a ceiling. Frequencies dissolved one by one. The high hiss of breath. Gone. The mid-range pulse of my own heartbeat. Gone. The subtle rush of blood in my ears. Gone. The deeper rumble of footsteps, still there, but faint and fading. Every sound I'd ever taken for granted was peeling off me like old skin. The cave walls glistened faintly as my headlamp traced over them, covered in a thin, wet sheen that didn't drip or run. Moisture that refused movement. Stone that refused echo. Space that refused vibration. The air was thick, heavy, still. Some caves hum with their own natural acoustics. This cave killed acoustics. My flashlight flickered. Not from battery, it flickered like the darkness itself absorbed the beam, swallowing photons the way it swallowed sound. The deeper I went, the more the world tightened around me, The tunnel constricted, walls closing inward until I had to slide sideways between two cold slabs of stone that pulsed with quiet, rhythmic pressure. A few minutes further in, I noticed the marks. The same circle and line symbol carved over the cabin walls appeared here. But deeper, more desperate, carved so violently into the rock that some lines were nearly an inch deep. They weren't symbols anymore. They were warnings. Some marks were smeared with dried earth. Some with something darker. Some looked like fingernail scratches dragged across stone until they broke. I kept walking. Not because I was brave. Because the world behind me felt even worse. Then the tunnel opened abruptly. A wide cavern yawned beneath my feet, a vast hollow deep inside the mountain. My light cut across it, but the beam died quickly, leaving the space ahead in a dim, oppressive half-shadow. The silence was so complete that it made my bones ache. And the center of the cavern, my flashlight caught it only for a moment. And in that instant, I understood everything the villagers had died trying to record. The center wasn't empty. A pool of water, black, still, perfectly round, sat like an eye in the floor of the cavern. Not a natural pool. Its edges were too symmetrical, too intentional. Water from the silent stream fed into it in a thin ribbon, disappearing into its depths without a ripple. A pool that wasn't liquid. A pool that was void. My legs weakened. This was the place the journals called its mouth. This was where sound went to die. The air above the pool shimmered faintly in the beam of my light. At first, I thought it was heat distortion, until I remembered how cold the air was. Then the shimmer thickened, took on shape. Shape of something rising out of the water. Not fully. Not visibly. But a presence. A suggestion. A distortion in the air, tall and thin and impossible to focus on. It bent the light around it like a lens. A pressure grew in my skull, a squeezing behind my eyes. My last shreds of hearing flickered. Everything inside my head throbbed with a rhythm that wasn't mine. A deep, steady pulse. From. I felt the cave listening. Not the way an animal listens. The way the ocean listens as you drown. The shimmering distortion tilted, slowly, like a colossal head turning to look at me. My knees buckled. I fell onto my hands, the cold stone pressing against my palms. The pulse grew stronger. From. Something inside me shifted. A sensation deep in my ear canals. The soft, sickening feeling of something being pulled. I clamped my hands over my ears. Didn't matter. The pressure pushed inward. A suction without air. A hunger without sound. My hearing dropped another layer. I couldn't hear my body anymore. Not even the vibrations. The world had finally become fully, horrifyingly mute. A whisper rippled across the cavern floor. Not through my ears. But through my mind. Come closer. The words weren't spoken. They were imposed on my thoughts, like someone else thinking inside my skull. I scrambled backward. My boots slipped on the wet stone. My palms slid across carvings deep in the rock. Please, warnings, prayers scratched by the villagers before they disappeared. Do not drink. Do not hear. Do not let it empty you. Then, from behind me, a vibration in the ground. A footstep. The shadow had followed me after all. I spun, heart slamming against my ribs. The shadow man stood at the tunnel entrance. But now its silhouette was clean, sharp, fully human-shaped. It had grown clearer as I had grown quieter. Because my silence was feeding it. Its head cocked. Its chest rose and fell. Breathing with my breath pattern. It took a step toward me. Smooth, controlled, rehearsed. And in that same moment, from behind me, the void in the pool pulsed again. Two predators. One feeding on sound. One feeding on silence. And I was exactly in the middle. I stumbled to my feet, dizzy, nearly falling into the black pool. The shimmering distortion reached toward me. Not with a hand, but with gravity, a pull, a beckoning, a claiming. Behind me, the shadow advanced, its footfalls perfectly silent. I backed against the cavern wall, chest heaving. Though I couldn't hear even my own panic. The shadow extended an arm toward me. The void reached through the air toward me. And only one thought cut through the horror. If I lose one more frequency of hearing, I won't hear myself think. And then I won't be me anymore. The world around me compressed into two shapes. The void and the black pool, stretching gravity toward my bones. And the shadow creature blocking the only exit, mimicking each flicker of my panic with improving accuracy. I stood between them. A living thing holding the last scraps of sound inside a body that could no longer hear. My thoughts weren't even thoughts anymore. They were pressure. Dense, muffled, locked behind the walls of a dying sense. The void pulsed again. From. Not in the air. In my mind. A low, irresistible call, as if the pool had reached directly into my skull and wrapped its fingers around the softest part of my consciousness. The shadow moved closer. Its gait smoother now, imitating me with such precision that if I hadn't been watching it, I might have believed I was seeing my own reflection walking in a dream. Where my movements trembled with fear, its movements were calm, assured. A perfected version of the human shape it had chosen to borrow. I stumbled sideways. My shoulder smashed into rock. I didn't hear the impact, not even the vibration. My hearing was gone. Every last frequency stolen. The void had eaten everything that made the world reach my ears. And the silence wasn't a void anymore. It was a presence. Alive. Listening. Breathing. The shadow stepped so close I could feel the air shift beside my face. It leaned its head in, inches from mine, studying every detail of my expression with a patient, almost clinical hunger. It reached out its hand. My hand, copied without flaw but darker at the edges, like a photograph exposed to shadow. Behind me, the void surged. The pool rippled outward. The first movement I'd seen in it, it was rising. Or something inside it was rising. My mind screamed. My mouth opened. I felt my throat vibrate. But nothing came out. Not even inside my own skull. The shadow paused at my silent scream. It tilted its head. Something like recognition flickered across its faceless outline. And then, for the first time since the silence took me, I felt something hit my eardrum. A sound. Not a real sound. But the memory of one. A ghost of vibration. Something my brain registered without hearing. A footstep. Behind me. But impossibly close. I turned instinctively. Too fast. And in that instant I understood the trap. The void didn't tug me with gravity. It tugged me with silence. It used the absence itself to carve a hole in my senses. And when I turned, my footing gave way. I slipped. The cavern floor tilted beneath me. The edge of the black pool rushed forward. Nothing in the world made a sound as I fell. But something in the darkness moved. A shape rising to meet me, tall and shifting, formed from absence and memory and centuries of devoured noise. Then, a hand seized my arm. Not the shadow's. Not mine. Human. Warm. Strong. The shadow stood behind me. But it didn't have hands like that yet. It wasn't finished learning. I looked up. A face hovered above mine. A young man. Pale. Breathless. Eyes wide. He mouthed something. Words I couldn't hear. Then he pulled harder. Another hand grabbed my jacket. Another person. Then another. 3, 4, 7. Figures from the village. Their bodies impossibly preserved. Their faces hollowed but determined. People the stream had emptied, but whose final scraps of self had held together long enough to resist becoming shadows. They weren't saving me from the void. They were pushing me away from where they had been pulled. Their mouths were open in silent screams as they heaved me back from the pool. My hand tore free from the gravity of the void. I collapsed on the cavern floor, gasping uselessly. The villagers fell backward into the pool as if yanked by ropes. The void welcomed them. Not violently, but with the inevitability of drowning. The shadow recoiled. It retreated 2 steps. The first backward movement I had ever seen it make. It wasn't the void's servant. It was its neighbor. Its scavenger. Its opportunist. And it didn't want to be taken by the deeper hunger in the cave. I pushed myself up, shaking. For a moment, I forgot how to use my limbs. My senses so mangled that movement felt borrowed. The shadow watched. Not attacking. Not helping. Waiting. It wanted the last living version of me. But only once I was quiet enough. I turned. The tunnel stretched upward behind me like a throat of stone leading out of the mountain. I ran. The shadow followed. But slower than before. Reluctant. As if afraid of the void behind us. I climbed until my muscles screamed. I reached the tree line. The forest swayed silently in the wind I could no longer hear. The shadow stopped at the cave mouth. Afraid to step into the wind's vibration. I stumbled through the woods, unable to hear branches breaking under my feet, unable to hear the pounding of my heart, unable to hear the labored breath tearing through my throat. When I finally saw sunlight, I didn't run toward it. I fell into it. Hours later. Or days. Rangers found me wandering along a fire road. My eyes unfocused. Ears bleeding. Hands trembling in rhythmic pulses like an internal metronome had broken inside me. They spoke to me. I watched their lips move. But I heard nothing. They say my hearing loss is complex. They say I should be grateful to be alive. They say wilderness can do strange things to the mind. But sometimes, late at night, in the narrow strip of nothingness where dreams slip into waking, I feel the faintest vibration deep in my skull. A footstep. Not mine. A breath. Not mine. A heartbeat. Not mine. Then I feel a presence standing in the corner of my room. Not approaching. Just waiting. Waiting for silence. Real silence. Total silence. Because the shadow didn't follow me out of the forest. It didn't have to. The silence came with me. And piece by piece. Sound by sound. It is hollowing me out. From the inside. One day soon. The last sound in my head will go quiet, and when it does, I think I finally understand what the shadow is waiting for. It's waiting for me. To become. Its echo. Story 4. I didn't take the night shift at the campus library because I needed the money. I took it because it was quiet. Predictable. A place where nothing unexpected ever happened. After the kind of year I'd had, breakups, burnout, dropping grades, I wanted stillness more than anything. And the old library, built in 1905 and barely renovated since, had exactly the right kind of stillness. Heavy wood shelves, warm lamps, the soft musk of paper that felt older than the country itself. The only part of the building I didn't like was the basement. The archives. The place where the air always felt too cold, too slow. And the worst part of the archives wasn't the microfilm machines or the locked stacks or even the dust. It was the card catalog. Rows and rows of old wooden drawers stretching the length of the room, Hundreds of tiny compartments, each with a metal label holder and a brass pull worn smooth by decades of hands. They didn't use it anymore, of course. Everything had been digitized long before I enrolled. But some administrator insisted it remain intact as a historical artifact, so there it sat, waiting, like a relic of some forgotten ritual. On my third night shift, I had to start the digital transcription project, scanning any remaining physical cards so the university could store them in an archive database. I wasn't thrilled, but it beat shelving books in the upper stacks, where late-night students whispered loudly about breakups and exams. So there I was, basement light humming overhead, alone with the old card catalog. And silence. Not the comfortable kind. A different kind. A silence that felt like it was listening to me. I rolled my cart to the first section and pulled open a drawer labeled .al. The wood groaned, low and reluctant. The sound echoed too loudly in the bare concrete room. I sifted through cards, yellowed, typewritten, some stamped with dates older than my grandparents. Then I reached a card that wasn't printed, a scrap of torn lined paper. No date. No subject. Just a few shaky words written in black ink. Please don't leave me down here. I stared at it for a long moment, feeling the cold air thicken around my arms. The handwriting looked wrong. Jagged. Desperate. Not something a librarian would have slipped into a catalog by mistake. I put it aside, assuming it was a student prank or some failed attempt at creative expression. Then I opened the next drawer. Halfway back, between two legitimate catalog cards, another scrap of paper waited. This one read, "I hear him at night." A chill crept slowly up my spine. I looked over my shoulder, half expecting someone to be watching from the aisle. But the basement remained empty and perfectly still. I almost shut the drawer right then, rolling my cart away to pretend I hadn't seen anything. But curiosity, stupid, heavy curiosity, dragged my hand back. The next drawer. Empty of cards entirely. Instead, it held a single envelope. No stamp. No seal. Just my name handwritten across the front in small block letters. My breath caught. I scanned the basement again, pulse racing. The room was silent. Too silent. Even the hum of the overhead lights seemed dimmer now, as if muffled under a thick blanket. I opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a folded piece of old library letterhead, yellowed and brittle. I unfolded it. The note said, "I'm still here. In the drawers. I never went home." Below it was a second line. Rushed, jagged, almost scratched into the paper. "Don't let them forget me." I nearly dropped the letter. My hands had started to shake. Something about the air changed. A subtle pressure. A coldness that seemed to seep up from the floor through my shoes. I forced myself to breathe slowly and closed the envelope, sliding it back into the drawer. This had to be a prank. A cruel one, maybe, but still a prank. Some student messing with new staff. Or a leftover project from a creative writing assignment. Right? I turned to leave. But the drawer beside me slid open on its own, not violently. Not abruptly. Just a gentle, smooth glide. As if a hand I couldn't see had pulled it. Inside was another piece of paper. No handwriting this time. Just a single, printed name. Elias Mercer. 1923 to 1946. I stared at the name, something tightening in my chest. I knew that name. Every student did. Elias Mercer, the student who disappeared in the 1940s. One of the unsolved campus legends. He was said to have taken his life in the library basement, though the school denied it. Others said he'd simply vanished. No records. No remains. No closure. Students joked he haunted the stacks. I never laughed at that joke. The air around me grew colder, wrapping around my shoulders like unseen fingers. I stepped back, and a faint creak sounded deeper in the rows. A slow, measured sound, like another drawer opening. Farther down the aisle. Then another. And another. Soft thuds lined the basement as dozens of drawers slid open a fraction of an inch. All of them facing me. All of them waiting. The basement had gone still again. But now, beneath the silence, I felt something new. A presence. A pressure. A weight of attention gathering behind the walls, squeezing in around me like I'd stepped into a coffin lined with air. My flashlight flickered once. Just once. But long enough to show a figure standing between two catalog cabinets. Not moving. Not breathing. Just there. When the light steadied, the figure was gone. But a drawer at my elbow slid fully open, slamming wood against wood in total silence. Inside, a note waited. Handwritten. Rushed. Desperate. You shouldn't have come down here alone. For a long moment, I couldn't move. My body stood locked between the rows of old wooden drawers, breath stuck halfway up my throat, as if the basement had closed its cold fingers around my lungs. The note in the open drawer stared up at me, ink still glistening faintly, as though it had been written seconds ago, not decades. You shouldn't have come down here alone. The words throbbed in my mind, not through sound but through presence, like the pressure you feel during a storm when the air gets heavy. Somewhere deeper in the basement, another drawer slid open with a soft, long exhale of wood against metal. Then another. Then a third. I swallowed hard. Stepping back felt dangerous. Stepping forward felt worse. The room felt tilted, like every aisle led towards something that had been waiting a very long time. I forced myself to glance over my shoulder. The rows behind me were still. Perfectly still. The lights overhead buzzed in that tired, faint way fluorescent bulbs do, but even their hums seemed to fade as I listened. The silence wasn't natural. It felt occupied. I reached for the drawer, hand trembling. Maybe the note was a prank. Maybe earlier staff had planted these messages years ago to freak out freshman workers like me. Maybe I was being dramatic. But the moment my fingers touched the slip of paper, I knew it hadn't waited years. It was warm. Not body warm, warm the way paper gets when held tight in a closed fist. My heart dropped into my stomach. I pulled my hand back sharply. Another drawer, farther down the row, shot open, faster this time. The cabinet jolted slightly as it did, wood rattling, the sound swallowed somewhere high in the rafters. I turned toward it, scanning the nameplate on the front. Me. Something about that label tugged at my memory. I half-stepped toward it, only for a soft click to echo from the opposite side of the aisle. A drawer behind me had opened. By exactly the width of a hand. Just enough for something to slip inside. Or out. I backed up slowly, pushing my cart in front of me like a shield. My breath fogged faintly in the air, even though the basement wasn't cold enough for that. The sensation hit me then, like walking into a room where someone has just been crying. That heavy, human density of emotion clinging to the walls. I reached the open drawer marked Me and peered inside. Where there should have been hundreds of catalog cards, orderly and crisp, there was almost nothing. Just a few cards scattered like teeth in a dark mouth. One card sat perfectly centered. I picked it up before thinking, typed in faded ink. Mercer, Elias, Study Notes, 1946. Typed. Not handwritten. Filed like any other catalog entry. Except the library digitized all of its old theses and student work over 20 years ago. Nothing from the 1940s should have remained in here. I flipped it over. On the back, in fresh black ink. Why didn't anyone read them? The words blurred slightly as my pulse hammered in my wrists. The hairs along my arms stiffened one by one. I put the card back, hands shaking. Another drawer slammed open, the wood jerking with enough force to make me flinch. The sound should have echoed, but it didn't. The noise died as soon as it was born, absorbed by the air like the room didn't want anyone upstairs to know what was happening. A scraping sound followed. Soft at first, then growing louder. The sound of hundreds of cards shifting against one another. Like something was brushing its hand through the drawers. From the inside. My body locked. The scraping moved deeper into the cabinets. A ripple, a wave of motion, traveled through the wood as drawer after drawer trembled, their metal handles clicking back and forth. Then, somewhere in the middle of the wall of cabinets, a drawer slid open slowly. Too slowly. Like someone savoring the movement. Its contents spilled forward, not cards, but small torn pieces of paper falling like snow. Each scrap fluttered to the floor soundlessly. I crouched, because some part of me, some naive part, still thought maybe I could make sense of this, and picked up the nearest scrap. A single sentence scrawled in cramped handwriting. He kept writing but no one came. My throat tightened. I reached for another scrap. He tried the doors. They didn't open. Another. He knocked until his knuckles broke. My fingers shook. The pieces were fragments of something larger. Something written by someone who had been trapped in this basement long before I was born. A final scrap lay near my shoe. He is still here. Before I could react, the temperature dropped sharply. Frost formed at the edges of the metal drawer handles. My breath escaped in a trembling plume of fog. The overhead lights dimmed, not flickering, but dimming deliberately, as if responding to something unseen. Then, from the farthest row of cabinets, the very last one, half hidden in shadow, a drawer pulled open with excruciating slowness. It stopped halfway. Paused. Waited. I couldn't see inside, it was too dark. Something moved in that drawer. Not a hand. Not a person. Something smaller. Something that made the cards shift softly like breath on paper. Then. Tap. 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 Fingers. No. Not fingers. Something tapping a card against the wood. A moment later, a single index card slid out of the darkness and landed at my feet. Face down. I reached for it, my hand trembling so badly the paper almost slipped through my fingers. I turned it over. My name was written across it. In the same handwriting as the others. The ink still wet. But below my name, scrawled so violently it dug grooves into the card, was a date. Today's date. Today. Tonight. A cold shudder seized my spine. I stared at the card, afraid to turn around, afraid to look at anything other than the small, trembling piece of cardstock in my hand. Then, behind me, amid the rows of wooden drawers, I heard the slow, unmistakable sound of someone stepping out from between the cabinets. Not a drawer moving. Not with settling. Footsteps. Soft. Close. Human. I turned. And standing between the rows, lit faintly by the dying overhead lights, was a figure. Thin. Young. Wearing clothes decades out of style. His face pale. His eyes dark. Not hateful. Not angry. Just lonely. He opened his mouth. Not to scream. Not to threaten. But to speak the first words that had been waiting 80 years in the dark. But when he spoke, there was no sound at all. For several seconds, I couldn't move. Couldn't think. Couldn't even blink. The figure standing between the aisles, the young man in the out-of-date clothes, was as clear as any living person, not translucent, not shimmering, not hazy. Solid. Present. But when his lips moved, nothing came out. His mouth formed a shape. A name, I think. Or maybe a plea. But the library swallowed his voice the moment it left him. He frowned, frustrated. His chest rose as if he tried again, and again the silence clamped down around him like iron jaws. Not even a whisper survived. But the air in the room shifted, dense, charged, like the moment before a storm when electricity gathers beneath your skin. I staggered back, gripping the edge of a drawer for balance. The wood felt colder than before, almost damp, as if the card cabinets themselves were sweating. Frost crusted around several drawer handles. The lights flickered again, dimming to a sickly, uneven glow. The young man stepped toward me. Not aggressive. Not threatening. Just desperate. A desperation that radiated from him in waves, heavy enough to make my throat tighten. He stopped about 6 feet away, eyes on mine, not pleading, not haunting, but searching, like he was trying to see if I could understand. His lips moved again, slow enough that I might have read them if panic wasn't buzzing in my skull. He tried once, twice. Then his shoulders sagged in defeat. A drawer beside him slid open. A quiet, deliberate movement. Then another drawer behind me. Then another. Dozens of drawers. Opening just an inch. As if the entire wall of cabinets had inhaled together. He extended his hand toward one of the drawers, and a card tugged itself forward like a dog straining at a leash. Slowly, the card rose out of the drawer and drifted through the air toward him before dropping into his palm. He held it out to me. His eyes intense. Waiting. My hands shook as I took it from him. On the card was a short message, the ink shaky and uneven. Can't speak. Not since they found me. My breath hitched. I glanced up at him. He nodded once, quick, eager, relieved that I understood. Another card drifted toward him. He caught it clumsily, like someone who hadn't used their hands in decades. He handed that one to me too. You can help. You heard me. I swallowed hard. I didn't hear anything. He shook his head violently. Took another card. Wrote faster this time, desperation tightening his movements. No. Not with ears. With attention. My skin prickled. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed louder, or maybe quieter, I couldn't tell. The sound seemed to flutter like a dying moth between pitches. He reached for another card. As he did, a drawer halfway down the aisle slammed open violently, wood cracking against wood. I jumped, dropping the card. It skittered across the floor. The young man, Elias, I knew now, whirled toward the sound. His posture changed instantly, tense, wary. He knew that sound. Recognized it. Feared it. Slowly, from the darkness of the open drawer, something shifted. Not a person. Not a shape I could name. More like pressure. A stirring in the air, thick and low, like a breath inhaled from the wrong direction. The paper inside the drawer rustled, not from wind, but from displacement, like something unseen was dragging itself forward. Elias darted in front of me, raising both arms protectively. Another drawer flung open. Then another. And another. Close ones. Too close. Notes tumbled out like dead leaves. Some drifted. Some plummeted. Some fluttered upward unnaturally, as if caught in an invisible draft rising from the cabinets themselves. Elias snatched another card and wrote with furious, jerking strokes. Don't answer it. Don't read anything it sends you. Before I could ask what he meant, a drawer beside my leg creaked open. Inside was a fresh white card. Completely blank. Then, as I watched, dark ink bled across its surface, forming letters with serpentine slowness. Hello. I stepped back so fast I nearly fell. The card pushed itself further out of the drawer, as if nudging my ankle. Another drawer across the aisle opened. A card slid out. We missed you. My stomach dropped. Elias grabbed my wrist, shaking his head violently. He thrust a different card into my hand. Don't let it name you. Don't let it remember you. The lights flickered, dimmed, then surged bright with a hard white glow that made the whole basement look skeletal. More drawers opened. Dozens at once. The clatter strangely soft, as if muffled by the air. Cards spilled out like a swarm, dragging themselves across the floor, fluttering toward my feet, forming crooked, trembling words. Stay. Right with us. We're still waiting. Elias grabbed my arm. His fingers were ice cold. Too cold. He scribbled another message, forcing it into my palm. Run. Not upstairs. It waits there. We go deeper. Deeper. The thought turned my bones to ice. What's deeper? I whispered. He didn't write an answer. He just pointed, shaking, toward the far wall, where a narrow service hallway stretched into darkness I'd never noticed before. A place no student was allowed. A place no staff ever mentioned. A place the card catalog had begun turning toward. Elias took my hand, cold fingers like memory itself, and tugged me toward the shadows. Behind us, the drawers began to close one by one, in perfect unison, until the entire catalog had sealed itself like a great wooden maw waiting to reopen. Except one drawer did not close. The one that held my card. The one with my name. And today's date. It clicked open wider. Inviting. Hungry. Elias pulled me harder, and together we stepped into the hallway where the lights did not reach. Elias didn't speak, he couldn't, but the urgency in the way he tugged my hand was unmistakable. His grip was ice cold, like holding the memory of a hand rather than a living one, and yet the pressure was real enough to pull me forward into the service hallway the college pretended did not exist. The air changed the moment we stepped inside. It felt tighter, compressed, laden with the dryness of old concrete and the breath of undisturbed darkness. The faint hum of the basement's fluorescent lights died behind us, replaced by a deeper, older quiet, the kind that feels carved out by time rather than neglect. Elias moved fast, too fast for someone who'd been dead for 80 years, yet somehow too quietly for someone with weight. His footsteps didn't echo. Mine did, but only visually. I could see my shoes hit the ground. I could feel the vibration through the floor. But the sound never reached the air. The corridor stretched unnaturally long. Each step felt like it ended in a place farther down than it should have been. The architecture didn't make sense. Narrow walls, low ceiling, pipes running overhead like crooked ribs inside the belly of something ancient. As we walked, the temperature dropped again. My breath clouded. Elias's did not. He turned sharply into a stairwell so old the railing was rough iron wrapped in decades of dust. The stairs descended in a circular coil, but my flashlight faded at the third step, swallowed by the thick darkness below. And yet Elias kept going, tugging me down into the spiral, as though he knew every inch of the descent. Halfway down, I heard something. Not a sound. A sensation. A rustle against my mind, like pages turning somewhere inside the dark. My skin prickled. Elias, I whispered, where are you taking me? He didn't answer, but he tightened his grip, almost painfully, and shook his head. Not here. Not at this depth. At the bottom of the stairwell lay a heavy door, old steel, painted a color that might once have been green. Rust gnawed its edges. Bolts crusted with age clung to its frame. Someone had scratched a symbol across it dozens of times, maybe hundreds. A circle. Split by a vertical line. My stomach lurched. I'd seen that symbol in Story 3, but here it meant something else. A warning. A barrier. A gate. Elias placed his palm against the metal. It responded. Not with sound. Nothing made sound here, but with a soft ripple in the air, as if the door exhaled. It swung open by itself, Inside lay a chamber that didn't belong beneath a college building. It belonged in catacombs, or in the underbelly of a forgotten library built by hands that feared what books could hold. Rows of shelves rose from the floor, each one packed not with books, but with notebooks, journals, loose bundles of letters tied with brittle string, folders thick with paper swollen by decades of moisture. This wasn't an archive. It was a graveyard. A graveyard for stories. For people. For memories the college didn't want anyone to keep. Elias stepped inside, the shadows curling around him like familiar blankets. My flashlight wavered near the threshold, struggling against a darkness that felt alive. The moment I crossed into the room, the beam dimmed to a trembling glow barely strong enough to illuminate a few feet. Every decade had its section. Every section had hundreds upon hundreds of names. My throat tightened. "Elias," I whispered hoarsely, "what is this place?" He moved to the 1946 shelf, reached up, and pulled down a stack of weathered notebooks tied with a frayed string. His hands shook. Not from fear, from memory. He handed me the top notebook. It was old. The cover cracked. The pages warped. My fingers left smudges on the dust. I opened it. And froze. Page after page filled with hurried writing. Not chaotic, orderly, structured, deliberate. Dates. Times. Observations. And then, on nearly every other page, one repeated line. "They don't want to hear me. They don't want to see me. I can't get out." By the 10th page, his handwriting deteriorated. By the 20th, the ink strokes shook. By the 30th, some words had been carved through the paper entirely, gouged deep enough to scrape the page beneath. Then I reached the page Elias had clearly been desperate for me to see. The ink had bled through with fury. They put me in the drawers. They put me in the cards. They filed me away. The next line was worse. "Everyone who gets lost down here gets filed." My breath hitched. I backed into a shelf without meaning to. Books jostled silently. Elias thrust another notebook into my hands. This one was newer, fewer years of dust, fresher ink, typed pages. At the top of the first page, incident report, student assistant, name redacted. Missing, 1998. I turned the page. Typed notes described. Large gaps in basement records. Inconsistent card catalog entries. A student reportedly seen wandering the stacks, confused and pale. Last known location, lower archives, restricted. A handwritten note, different ink, lay beneath. Found him in the drawers. But he was not himself. My chest tightened with nausea. Elias pulled my sleeve urgently. His eyes, dark, sorrowful, pleading, met mine. He handed me another card. This one he'd written fresh. Ink still wet. "We are not alone. You are not the first." Cold washed through me in a wave. "What do you mean?" I breathed. Before he could write another word. Somewhere in the darkness of the shelves, something stirred. A soft shuffle of paper. A whisper of motion. A breath made of dust. Not Elias. Not me. Something else. Something older. Something that had been filed long before either of us. Elias grabbed my hand. He dragged me behind the shelves, toward a narrow aisle lined with boxes labeled simply unsorted. Scraps of paper lay scattered here. Some handwritten. Some typed. Some torn. Some stained. I picked up one at random. A date at the top. November 2nd, 1974. Then a single line. "If anyone finds this, please tell my mother I didn't run away." My breath trembled. I dropped the paper. More movement echoed in the chamber. Not loud. but very close. Elias pushed me behind a pillar and shoved another card into my shaking hands. Don't look at them. They want your name. I swallowed hard. Who? He grabbed the card back, wrote quickly, the letters jagged. The forgotten, the ones who were never found. A figure drifted between the shelves in the darkness. Just a silhouette at first. Then a shape hunched with age. Paper thin and trembling. Its body covered in scraps of catalog cards stuck to its skin like scales. It turned toward us. Eyes empty. Mouth open in a silent wail. Elias pressed himself against the wall, shaking. And I understood. The card catalog didn't just remember people. It kept them. And something in the dark wanted to keep me too. Elias pressed himself against me, trembling so violently I could feel the cold rattling through his bones, if he even had bones anymore. The figure drifting between the shelves was wrong in every possible way, too thin, too slow, too segmented, like a marionette carved from pages instead of wood. Each movement rustled, not like footsteps on stone, but like paper folding in on itself. Cards clung to its body. Hundreds of them. Some taped. Some nailed. Some simply fused to the skin as if the ink had melted into flesh. Every step it took, tiny scraps flaked off and floated to the ground. Some bore names. Some bore dates. Some were blank, waiting. Elias grabbed my hand and scribbled on a card so fast the letters nearly tore through the cardstock. Don't read their names. They claim anyone who remembers. The figure turned. It didn't look at us, its hollow eyes held no focus, but the space around us tightened, the air thickening as if the room recognized me. As if the shelves, the cabinets, the drawers themselves leaned in slightly. The forgotten figure shuffled forward. 2 more shapes slid out behind it. Then 3. Then a dozen. All drifting in quiet unison, forming a human wall of paper-thin bodies and hollow eyes. My throat closed. Somewhere deep in the stacks, a drawer slammed open, the echo swallowed by the room before it could reach the air. A card slid across the floor toward my shoe. It bumped my toe. Waited. I crouched involuntarily. Didn't mean to. The card flipped over, like a living thing eager to be seen. My name. Again. In ink the color of dried blood. Below it, new writing bled across the cardstock as I watched. Return to file. A chill tore through me. The forgotten figures began moving faster, jerking, twitching, their limbs creaking silently, as if they hadn't used muscles in decades and were relearning how to chase. Elias yanked me sideways into another aisle. Shelves towered around us, stuffed with boxes labeled Lost Students. Unresolved Incidents. Unidentified Remains. Unfiled Souls. My flashlight flickered violently, as though the darkness was feeding on its battery. I shook it desperately. It glowed once, then faltered again. Elias pulled me deeper, toward the far end of the archive chamber where the shelves curved inward into a circular formation, the heart of the forgotten stacks. A large card catalog cabinet stood there. Older than the one upstairs. Massive. Almost reverent. Every drawer was labeled by hand. Names. 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 My skin crawled. Elias rushed to the back of the cabinet and tore open a drawer labeled Mercer, E. Inside was a single card, his name on it. His date. His handwriting. The same desperate strokes I'd seen upstairs. He pointed at it violently. Then at himself. This is where he was kept. This is how they trapped him. Then he shoved me away and scribbled a new message. They will put you in your drawer. You must find it first. And destroy it. I froze. Destroy my drawer. Destroy my card. Where would it be? But before the thought could form fully, the forgotten surged around the outer shelves, their blank faces angling toward the center. One reached out with a hand made of layered catalog cards, the fingers peeling open like paper fans. We sprinted. Cabinets shuddered as we passed. Drawers rattled. Names rustled. The walls pulsed with memory. My card, my drawer, was somewhere in this room. I just had to find it before they did. Elias pulled me down another aisle, but as we turned the corner, I saw it. A cabinet at the very end of the room, older than the rest, with drawer labels handwritten in uneven block letters. One drawer was slightly open, as if it had been waiting, expecting, calling. Light flickered inside it, not real light, but a pale glow like memory itself. My knees weakened. The drawer's metal label read, my name. Filed, today. Status, pending. My stomach dropped into my feet. It was already prepared. Already carved. Already eager. Elias grabbed my shoulders and shoved me toward it, gesturing wildly. Do it. Tear it up. Burn it if you can. My hands fumbled on the drawer handle. It slid open smoothly, too smoothly, like greased rails guiding me toward my own end. Inside lay my card. Exactly like the one upstairs, but now complete. Perfect. Precise. My name. Birth date. Student number. Home address. Course schedule. Everything the university knew about me. Everything the archive needed to take me. A whisper crawled through the room, not sound, not breath, just pressure forming words inside my skull. Filed. Kept. Belonging. The forgotten figures surged closer, their paper skin crackling silently. Long arms reached. Hollow mouths opened in noiseless screams. Elias shoved me again, eyes wild with urgency. Hands shaking violently, I reached into the drawer, grabbed the card, and ripped it straight down the middle. The moment it tore, a shockwave ripped through the room. The forgotten shrieked. Not in air, but in me. Like their voices tore through my bones. Every drawer in the chamber slammed shut at once. Lights burst overhead. My flashlight flared bright in my hand. Elias clutched his chest, like something had been pulled from inside him, then staggered backward. The archive groaned. Shelves shuddered. Papers spiraled upward in a furious cyclone. The darkness recoiled like an injured animal. A drawer behind us cracked open. Elias's drawer. And the single card with his name crumbled into dust. His eyes widened. Not in fear, but in relief. His body flickered. Edges blurring. Dissolving into faint motes of paper light. He looked at me. Smiled, small and trembling. And mouthed a word I didn't need to hear. Thank you. Then he was gone. Just gone. The forgotten screamed silently and retreated into the dark between shelves, their forms dissolving like burned paper. I ran. Up the aisle. Through the chamber door. Up the spiral stairs. Into the basement. Out of the library. Into the night. I didn't stop running until the campus lights disappeared behind me. Epilogue. Campus security searched the basement the next morning. They claimed there was no sublevel storage room. No sealed archival chamber. No hidden stairwell. No door with scratched symbols. Just the regular basement. Just the usual old card catalogs. But the head librarian pulled me aside quietly. Her face pale. Something strange happened last night, she whispered. A drawer opened by itself. One we didn't know existed. She handed me a photo. A drawer labeled. Unfiled, no record. Inside. A torn card. My name. Split clean down the center. The librarian frowned. "We don't know what it means," she said. "But it's never happened before." I didn't answer, didn't go back. But some nights, when my apartment is quiet, I swear I hear an old wooden drawer sliding open somewhere in the dark. And every time I turn toward the sound, I wonder if a card is being rewritten with my name pieced back together, letter by letter. Story 5. The highway that runs across the northern part of the state is a strange one, long enough to make you forget where you came from, empty enough that you start to imagine you're the only person left awake in the world. On that road, halfway between two towns nobody ever visits on purpose, sits my diner, Marlin's 24-hour stop, though most locals just call it the stop. If you drive past late at night, it looks like any other roadside diner. Neon sign flickering. Coffee turning stale on the burner. A jukebox that hasn't worked since the 90s. I bought the place from my uncle 6 years ago, figuring it'd be a good way to pay off a few debts and live a quieter life. But quiet has a way of turning into something else when you're alone long enough. Most nights, we get the usual crowd, truckers, insomniacs, people avoiding their own homes. The late shift is steady, predictable. Except for one rule. A rule we don't write down. A rule we don't explain. No one sits at booth 6 after midnight. Not the staff, not the customers, not me. Especially not me. If you ask my waitresses about it, they'll change the subject. If you ask the regulars, they'll give a chuckle that feels rehearsed, like a joke they're afraid to finish. But everyone follows the rule. Everyone. The first time I broke it, I didn't even realize I'd done it. It was a slow night, early November, wind dragging dead leaves across the parking lot like the world was trying to sweep itself clean. 2 truckers sat near the bar counter, their plates empty and their eyes drifting shut. My night shift waitress, Nora, was wiping down tables with that bored, tired rhythm people get when they've repeated the same motion for 20 years. I came out from the back office, rubbing sleep out of my eyes, and decided to help Nora clear the booths. Without thinking, I walked straight to booth 6. The vinyl seat sagged under my weight as I sat down. And for a moment, just a moment, the world inside the diner went strangely still. The hum of the fridge in the kitchen softened. The ticking clock above the bathroom slowed. Nora's cloth froze mid-wipe. Even the neon sign outside paused in its flicker. I didn't notice any of this yet. I just felt weirdly tired. Heavier than usual. Like gravity had decided to double itself beneath me. I reached for the laminated menu lying on the table. That's when I realized someone was sitting across from me. A man. A stranger. I hadn't seen him come in. Hadn't heard the bell on the door. Didn't recognize him from any regulars. Yet there he was, staring down at a menu he held like it contained a secret written in tiny print. He didn't look up. Not at first. He was old, not ancient, but worn, the way truckers sometimes look after a 4-day haul. Deep lines carved down his cheeks. Jaw clenched so tight his molars must have been grinding themselves into dust. His clothes were mismatched layers, flannel shirt beneath a work jacket, scarf frayed at both ends. A trucker's cap lay on the table beside him, darkened with sweat and time. His hands rested on the menu. Large hands. Cracked knuckles. Nails rimmed with highway grime. But what struck me first wasn't his face or clothes. It was the fact that he didn't look real. He looked like a photograph someone had cut out from an old magazine and pressed into the seat across from me. Flat. Dim, washed out. Like the edges of him were still deciding whether to stay in this world. I forced a steady voice. "Hey there. I didn't see you come in." Slowly, painfully slowly, he lifted his head. His eyes were cloudy. Not like cataracts, more like smoke trapped behind the glass of his pupils. When he finally looked at me, something cold settled at the base of my throat. He waited a long moment. Then spoke. Except it wasn't talking. It was reciting. Like he was repeating something he'd said 1,000 times before, and every word hurt to say. "The freight's late." His voice crackled like a record played too slow. "The freight's late, and the clock won't stop." I blinked. "Sorry. Are you looking for someone? You need help?" He didn't respond. His gaze dropped back to the menu, scanning the same 3 sections over and over like he expected the words to rearrange themselves. "The freight," he whispered, "going to the dark rails. Running behind. Running behind." For the first time, I noticed Nora. She was frozen several booths away, watching us. Her eyes wide. Terrified. She mouthed something to me. "Get up." I frowned. "What's wrong?" I called to her. She only shook her head violently and gestured again. Later, she told me she didn't dare say it out loud. She was afraid he'd hear. I turned back to the man in booth 6. He hadn't moved. Not an inch. His fingers began tapping the table, not in a rhythm, but in a pattern, like he was counting something only he could see. 5 taps. Pause. 2 taps. Pause. 3 taps. Pause. My chest tightened. "Are you waiting for a shipment?" I asked, trying to keep my voice low. He didn't answer. The tapping stopped. Then he looked at me, slowly, mechanically, as if he'd forgotten how heads were supposed to turn. His lips barely moved when he whispered. "The clock's slowing down for you, too." A chill crawled up my spine. Then he lifted one hand and placed it palm up on the table. Resting in it was something I hadn't noticed before. A small stack of diner tickets. Old ones. Yellowed. Corners curled. Some nearly falling apart. I picked up the top one. My heart froze. It was dated 7 years ago. The handwriting on it was mine. But the name in the customer section wasn't. Unknown, booth 6. The second ticket was older. The third older still. Each with the same note, scrawled in my handwriting. Customer did not order. The man leaned forward. "We never leave booth 6. His voice was hollow. Resigned. "We wait for the freight. We wait for the clock. We serve the hours instead of the food." Nora's voice finally broke through the silence. "Marlon," she whispered, "get up." Her voice shook like she was begging. I stood. Or tried to. My legs barely responded. My body felt pinned to the seat. The man across from me smiled. Or something like a smile. The corners of his mouth pulled back just a little too far. In just the wrong way. "Sit down," he croaked. "Your shift isn't over yet." The lights in the diner flickered. The clock above the bathroom paused mid-tick. And for a moment, everything inside the diner stopped. Even me. For a few heartbeats. Or maybe more, maybe less. I couldn't tell. The diner froze around me like someone had pressed pause on the world. The ticking clock above the restroom hung suspended mid-step. The neon sign outside stopped flickering mid-glitch. The 2 truckers by the counter were perfectly still, hands mid-gesture over half-empty mugs. Nora's cloth hovered an inch above the table she'd been wiping. Only I breathed. Only he breathed. If breathing was what he did, the vinyl seat under me felt wrong, too soft, too deep, like it was trying to absorb me. I forced my hands against the table, trying to lift myself up again. My arms trembled. The weight pressing down through my shoulders was familiar, too familiar. The fatigue of years of overnight shifts, compressed into seconds. Booth 6 was draining me. The man across from me didn't blink. Didn't shift. Didn't breathe in any way a living person should. His voice scraped out like someone dragging a nail across old tape. "Don't get up." A whisper, yet it landed with the weight of a command. My muscles tensed involuntarily. "We wait," he murmured, eyes drifting back to the menu like he hadn't finished reading it in decades. "We wait until the freight comes. We wait until the clock moves again." Something in the corner of my vision twitched. The second hand on the clock above the restroom moved. One slow, reluctant tick. Like a dying creature lifting its head. Then it stopped again. I swallowed, panic clawing up my throat. "What do you want?" I asked him. "What is this?" His fingers began tapping again. That same strange pattern. 5 taps. Pause. 2 taps. Pause. 3 taps. "What does that mean?" I whispered. He didn't look up. But his jaw clenched. "The others learned the pattern," he said. "You will too." "The others?" I echoed. He slid something across the table with a stiff, mechanical motion. It was another diner ticket. Older than the rest. Dark with time. Edges crumbling. The handwriting wasn't mine this time. Someone else's scrawl, rushed and uneven. Customer, unknown. Notes, wouldn't order. Wouldn't leave. Stayed all night. Comments, said he was waiting for the freight. At the bottom, in a faint imprint of pencil. "This booth is wrong. Don't sit here. Don't end up like me." My skin prickled. I looked up sharply. "You wrote this?" I asked him. He shook his head, slow, stiff. "No. Not me. He wrote that." A distant stare. He sat before me. "And where is he now?" I whispered. The man's lips twitched, something like a smile. But not happy. Not sad. Not human. "He's here." He tapped the booth. Then his own chest. Then the table. "All of us are here." A low hum vibrated through the diner floor, so faint I thought it was my imagination. But the silver napkin holders on the counter rattled slightly. The ketchup bottles quivered. The man across from me leaned forward slowly, as if the movement required effort. "You're tired," he said softly. "You've been tired for a long time." A tremor ran down my spine. He continued, voice thinning into something brittle. "You stay open all night. You serve people who don't notice you. You clean the same tables. Brew the same coffee. Watch the same lights burn. Every night. Again and again." He lifted the menu to eye level. Eventually, he whispered, "You forget when the last time you slept was." I froze. My mouth went dry. "How do you know that?" I whispered. "I learned you." His head tilted in a slow, unnatural arc, the booth watches. It knows who's ready. Ready for what? He didn't speak for a long, sickening stretch of time. Then, to stop leaving. A sharp gasp escaped behind me. Nora. Her paralysis broken. Her eyes wide and shining in horror. "Marlon," she choked out, barely above a whisper. "Marlon, don't look at him. Don't listen. Get up. Please. Get up." "I can't," I said through gritted teeth. "It won't let me." She ran toward me. Fast, faster than I'd ever seen her move. But as she crossed the center aisle, something shifted. The diner lights dimmed. The booth seemed to stretch, elongate, receding into the distance. Like space itself was rearranging. Filtering her away from me. "Nora!" I yelled. But she was already fading, like a reflection slipping out of sync. Then. Tick. The clock above the restroom moved again. But backwards. A single step back in time. The man smiled faintly. Not with joy. With inevitability. You feel it, don't you? He whispered. The hours backing up behind you. My heartbeat crashed against my ribs. What is this booth? I breathed. What does it want? His fingers tapped the table. That same rhythm. Slower this time, as if to help me understand. 5, 2, 3. Then he rasped. It counts the hours you've lost. He leaned closer, eyes burning with a tiredness older than any shift a man should ever work. And now it's counting yours. I tried to stand again. My legs didn't obey. The vinyl seat clung to me like tar, like it had grown around me. Across from me, the man's face began to blur. Edges softening. Lines smudging. Like time itself was erasing him. Slowly, deliberately. As if preparing a space for someone new. For me. The clock above the restroom gave one final shudder. Then. Tick. Backwards again. And the neon light outside flickered in reverse. The man whispered. You sit long enough. And the booth remembers you. I felt something cold coil around my ankles. Not physical, not visible. But heavy enough to sink me another inch into the seat. My voice cracked. Please, I need to get up. I have to get up. His eyes softened. And in a rare, human moment. The first hint of compassion in anything he'd said. He whispered. You should have listened to the rule. The booth was no longer just holding me down, it was absorbing me. The vinyl had begun to warm under my legs, almost pulsing faintly, like a slow heartbeat trapped inside the cushioning. My fingers dug into the edge of the table, but the surface felt soft, pliant, subtly curved as if bending beneath my touch in ways which shouldn't bend. The man across from me was fading. Not disappearing. Not vanishing. Just losing consistency. Thin patches of him going translucent, like smoke thinning in cold air. And yet, his voice grew clearer. Sharper. More deliberate. We don't leave booth 6, he repeated, the words scraping through the air like metal dragged across concrete. We don't walk away. We don't finish our coffee. We don't pay our checks. We sit. And sit. And wait. His eyes locked onto mine, and something deep inside me twisted. You feel it, don't you? He whispered. The slack in the hours, pulling you backward. As he spoke, the diner lights flickered again. But not the usual stutter of dying neon. These lights flickered in reverse, brightening where they should dim, dimming where they should flare. I swallowed hard. What is happening to me? He didn't try to explain. He simply pointed at the clock above the bathroom. The hour hand twitched. Just a fraction of an inch. And then began sliding backward. Not fast. Not dramatic. Slow, deliberate, terribly gentle. The minute hand followed. Slipping. Reversing time one breath at a time. No, I whispered. No, no, no. A glass clinked at the counter. Except I hadn't heard it clink when it fell. I saw it fall off the edge. Watched it spin. Watched it approach the floor. Then, instead of shattering, it reversed. Lifted. Rolled back. Repositioned itself on the counter. Time's rolling back, I breathed. What does that mean? The man leaned forward. His voice dropped to a soft, brittle rasp. It means you're being reset, he said. Like the rest of us were. Out of the corner of my eye, the two truckers sitting at the bar began moving again, but wrong. Their hands jerked back into earlier positions. Cups refilled with coffee they'd already drunk. One blinked, and his eyelids closed the wrong direction, from bottom to top. Nora stood frozen mid-stride, then slowly slid backward across the floor, returning to the position she'd been in when I first sat down. Her broom lifted itself off the ground and resumed sweeping in reverse. She was undoing. Unliving. No, I said again, fighting the weight in my chest. I'm not part of this. I'm not. You sat in the seat, the man whispered. You took the shift. You punched the hours. He tapped the table again. 5 taps. Pause. 2 taps. Pause. 3 taps. What does that mean? I asked through clenched teeth. He hesitated. Then, for the first time, I saw something like emotion flicker across his fading face. It's the count, he said, the count of who's been trapped in this booth. 5. 2. 3. That wasn't a rhythm. It was history. 52. No. 523. 523 people had sat in this booth since the diner opened. And stayed. My throat tightened. What happens to them? I whispered. He gestured to himself. Then to the air beside him. As if pointing to people only he could see. They become part of the clock, he said. Part of the freight. Part of the hours that keep this place running. He placed a hand on the table, and his fingers sank into the wood like it was soft clay. We carry time for the diner, he murmured. We hold it so the world can keep passing by on the highway. He leaned closer still. Every long night place needs something to burn, he said. A sacrifice to keep the doors open. A body to hold the hours. The vinyl tightened beneath me. Like fingers gripping my legs from below. My pulse thrashed. I serve food, I said. Not sure if I meant it as a plea or a denial. I'm not part of this place. I own it, I don't belong to it. He shook his head slowly. You belong more than anyone. Why? He lifted the diner ticket stack with trembling hands. Every ticket had my handwriting. And each one listed a date. A time. A name. Names I didn't recognize. Names of strangers. Names of travelers. Each labeled. Booth 6. Customer did not order. Then. Customer did not leave. Customer did not leave. Customer did not leave. I shook my head violently. No, I breathed, I never. I didn't. You've forgotten, he whispered. The booth takes memories first. It softens them, folds them away. You've wiped down this table 1,000 times. But you never wondered why the seat always felt warm when no one was here. The diner clock reversed another minute. Another. Another. The highway outside grew darker, then lighter, then darker again. As if the night were cycling through itself, looping time like an old reel of film. The man across from me grew blurrier with each minute lost, his edges flickered. He raised a trembling hand. You have to get out, he said softly. Before the count reaches you. The count. 524. My number. The next number. The next shift. The next hour holder. Nora's reversed motion stuttered. Then stopped. Her eyes locked on mine. And she mouthed. Run. Now. Suddenly, something pounded beneath the floor. A deep, mechanical thud. Like a train engine buried under the diner. A rhythm growing stronger. Thud. 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 The man smiled weakly. The freight's here. My heart nearly stopped. But it never stops for us, he whispered. Then his face split into a wide, collapsing grin. And he dissolved. Right there in the booth. Like dust being inhaled by the vinyl seat. The booth shuddered beneath me. Grinding. Pulling. Trying to make room. For the next shift. Me. For a split second, just long enough for a single heartbeat to scream through my chest, there was nothing across from me. No man. No fading outline. No rattle of breath or tapping fingers, only the sagging vinyl seat, exhaling a low warmth that felt like something had just sunk into it, burrowed down, and merged with the booth's memory. Then the booth pulled. Not physically at first, not like hands grabbing my legs, but with a pressure, a suction, a heaviness in my ribs that tightened with every reversing tick of the clock. The table bowed inward, as if bending toward me. The lights trembled. Time began to thicken, congeal, pooling around my ankles like cooling tar. I forced my hands onto the table and shoved backward. The vinyl groaned beneath me. My legs barely moved. Outside, the highway lights flickered, brightening, dimming, brightening again, moving through dawn, dusk, noon, midnight in rapid spasms. The neon diner sign outside sputtered in reverse, rewinding years of grime and burnout, pulsing like a dying heartbeat trying to restart. A deep thud shook the floor. Once. Twice. Again. The freight. The invisible train beneath the diner, pounding its arrival. I felt it in my bones. Nora snapped into motion again, forward this time, no longer running backward in rewound time. She lunged for me, hands outstretched, eyes wide with a sick, desperate fear I'd never seen in her. "Marlon," she shouted, her voice breaking like something inside her had already snapped once tonight. "Don't let it take you, get up now." "I can't." I yelled back, my voice shredded with panic. "It won't let me go." Her breath hitched. "It's choosing you." The floor rumbled again, heavier, closer, like the freight's engine was grinding its way up through the tile. Thud. 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 Nora staggered but kept moving, reaching for my arm. The moment her fingers brushed my sleeve, the air snapped with a violent crack, like a rubber band breaking, and she was flung back across the diner. "Nora!" I shouted. She hit a booth hard, booth 3, slamming into the vinyl, gasping. The lights above her sputtered and dimmed, and her face twisted, horrified, as if she'd seen something at her shoulder no one else could. I tried again to stand. The booth tightened around me like a creature wrapping around its prey. My spine tingled. My vision blurred. The edges of the world rippled. The booth was digesting me. Not in flesh, not in blood. But in time. Every second I sat, it drank more of me. The diner clock jerked backward again, then ceased. The hour hand spasmed in place. The glass front cracked. Outside, through the windows, I watched a trucker walk backward toward his rig, steps retracing one by one, until he blinked out of existence entirely, swallowed by a version of the night that had already happened. "Marlon," Nora panted from across the diner, struggling to push herself upright, "you have to fight it, listen to me, you have to." "I'm trying." My voice strained against the pressure building through my chest. The booth pulsed under me. The vinyl stretched, creaked, groaned like skin pulled too tight over bone. Then I felt it. The faint tug at the base of my skull. A memory slipping loose. Not fading, not blurring. Leaving. What is it doing?" I gasped. Nora's expression collapsed. "It's taking your hours," she whispered. "It's taking everything you ever lived through at night." A rush of moments flickered through my mind, closing shifts, coffee pots, sweeping floors, driving home at dawn, the sound of tires on asphalt at 3 a.m., loading signs, paying bills under cheap fluorescent light. The booth was pulling them from me, extracting them like threads. The freight thudded again beneath the diner floor, closer now, a heartbeat under my heartbeat. "I can't," I gasped. "I can't breathe." Nora screamed my name, but her voice came through like a muffled radio station dissolving into static. Then, from the kitchen doorway, someone else stepped out. A man in a diner apron. Old style. Faded. Buttoned wrong. hair gray, eyes vacant. But his face. Oh God. His face. I knew him. My uncle. Except, not how he looked when I bought the place. No. This was him from the stories he'd never told, the years he worked overnight shifts before I was born. Pale. Exhausted. Hollow. His lips moved. Not sound. Just shape. Don't sit. Don't ever sit. He lifted a trembling hand and pointed at me. Or past me. Toward the space between my spine and the booth's backrest. His face contorted in something between fury and pleading. Get up. The diner shook. The booth tightened. My throat seized as something cold wrapped around my ribs. The hours I had lived. The hours I had lost. The hours I had forgotten. The booth inhaled. And for the first time, I felt the truth of the freight. It wasn't a train. It was the weight of all the time this place had taken. A lifetime of nights. Hungry. The booth pulled harder. Nora sobbed. She was on her knees now, crawling toward me, fingers bleeding where she'd scraped the tile trying to get closer before time swallowed her again. Marlin, she gasped. Marlin, please. Then, in the deepest rumble yet, the freight struck directly beneath booth 6. The floor spiderwebbed with cracks. The table bent inward. The seat contracted like lungs pulling me deeper, and the booth whispered. Not with a voice, but with a memory. You're ready. I screamed as something inside me. My time, my hours, my nights, began to tear free. The booth wasn't tightening anymore. It was claiming me. Every second, every breath, every memory I'd ever lived past midnight was being tugged loose thread by thread, unwound from my bones like old cassette tape. The hum of the diner, the reversed lights, the shuddering air, the deep pulse of the freight beneath the floor, merged into a single vibration inside my skull, one that felt less like sound and more like a message. Sit. Stay. Serve. Become. Nora's voice cut through it like a blade dipped in desperation. Marlin, look at me. I tried. God knows I tried. But the booth had begun pulling me backward, sinking me into the seat. My muscles trembled with the strain to lift even an inch. Nora dragged herself forward on her elbows, nails scraping across the tile. The closer she got, the more the diner resisted, lights stuttering, booths distorting, the air thickening into something like tar. She reached the edge of booth 6. And froze mid-motion. A shockwave rippled outward from the center of the table. She hit an invisible wall. Hard. Nora, go, I choked. It's going to take you too. No, she wheezed, pressing her palms against the unseen barrier. No, I'm not leaving you here. Not like this. Not like him. Her eyes flicked toward the kitchen doorway, where my uncle's ghost still stood. Watching. He didn't move. He didn't blink. But his chest rose once. A faint, hollow imitation of a breath. And he nodded. Slow. Final. He wanted me to run. And wanted her to save me. Because he couldn't save himself. Another tremor rattled the diner. The freight thudded beneath me with a force that shook the windows. Thud. 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 The booth exhaled warm air around my waist. Like breath. Like it was drawing me into its lungs. Then the man who'd vanished, the one who'd been sitting across from me minutes ago, started to reappear. Not fully. Not visibly. But shadows collected in the seat across from me, rearranging themselves into something like shoulders, something like a face, a faint outline. The next shift. The next watcher. The next ghost. Don't let it finish. Nora screamed, her voice breaking. Marlin, you have to stand. You have to get out before the loop resets. I tried. I pushed against the table with every ounce of strength left in me. The vinyl groaned. The freight pounded. My vision blurred into streaks of white and blue. And then I felt it. The thread the booth was pulling from me. It wasn't just memory. It wasn't just time. It was the part of me that stays awake at night. The version of myself that lived through every long hour of this diner. The booth wanted that version. It wanted the man who kept the place running. It wanted my night self. My hours. My exhaustion. My life between dusk and dawn. And if it succeeded, I wouldn't die. Not exactly. I would just stay. As a ghost. A shadow. A shift that never ended. No, and no. I screamed. I tore upward with everything I had left, feeling the vinyl ripping under my palms, the table bending beneath my grip. Something inside me snapped. Not physically. But like a rope pulled too tight suddenly breaking loose. The booth jerked. The freight hammered. The world shuddered. And my body lifted half an inch. Just enough. Nora slammed against the invisible wall again, and this time it cracked. A sharp sound split the air. Like glass fracturing. "Marlon," she sobbed. "One more push. One more." I roared, lifting my torso another inch. And the booth shrieked. No sound escaped it, but my bones felt the vibration. A silent scream of ownership denied. The vinyl seat buckled beneath me. And I collapsed onto the floor as the booth convulsed and snapped back into place violently, like jaws slamming shut. Nora grabbed my arm and dragged me backward across the tiles. The diner warped and pulsed, trying to rewind the moment, trying to drag us back toward booth 6. But the booth was empty now. Unable to complete its cycle. Confused. Angry. The clock over the restroom twitched erratically. Then shattered, glass raining down like frozen time. The neon lights outside stuttered forward in the correct direction. For the first time that night. The booth stopped shaking. The vinyl relaxed. And the freight beneath the floor rumbled away, fading into distance, into years, into whatever void it called home. We reached the entrance. Nora shoved the door open so hard it slammed into the wall, and the moment the night air hit us, the diner behind us went dead silent. Then, the bell above the door chimed. Forward. Normally. We stumbled out onto the asphalt. Nora's arm wrapped tightly around my waist, half dragging me as my legs remembered how to work. We made it to the far end of the parking lot before I dared look back. The diner lights were steady. Normal. The world wasn't rewinding anymore. But booth 6. Booth 6 glowed faintly. Flecks of dust rose from the seat in thin spirals, like breath leaving a body. Nora whispered, "It's resetting. Will it try to finish what it started?" I asked hoarsely. "No," she said, wiping her face with trembling hands. "It won't want you, now that you broke the cycle." I took a long, shaking breath. "Then who?" She shook her head. "Don't think about that part." Behind the glass, something blurred into the seat across from booth 6. A shape. A person. Or the memory of one. The booth always found someone. Someone tired enough. Lonely enough. Worn down enough by the night to sit without thinking. Someone who wouldn't know the rule. Someone who would become the next customer who never orders. Nora squeezed my hand. "We're leaving," she said. "You're not staying here another night. Not ever." We walked away from the diner, our diner, without locking the door, without turning off the lights, without looking back again. But sometimes, when I drive past on the highway, I swear I still see it. Marlon's 24-hour stop. Open. Waiting. The neon sign flickering like a tired, hungry heartbeat. And in the window, always, always, someone sitting at booth 6. Staring down at the menu, waiting for the freight. Waiting for the clock. Waiting for the next hour to claim. If you're still here, congratulations. Most people don't stay awake this long. Most people don't travel this far into the quiet. We've walked together through forgotten deserts. Through the homes of strangers. Through mountains where silence has a mind of its own. Through archives where memories never die. And through a diner where time runs on something much older than coffee. 5 stories. 5 shadows stretching across the long hours of the night. And now, listen closely. Do you hear it? That faint sound outside your window. That creak in the hallway. Maybe it's nothing. Most nights, it is nothing. But after stories like these, the dark tends to feel a bit more full, doesn't it? Before you go. Before you turn off the lights and trust your home to stay quiet. I want to thank you. For letting me sit with you. For letting these stories keep you company. In the part of the night most people try to ignore, if your eyes are heavy, let them close. If your room feels different somehow, that's alright. Sometimes darkness is just darkness. Sometimes it's listening. And sometimes it's remembering. Until next time, dream gently. Or don't dream at all. This has been Little Dream. Good night.